A black Cadillac Escalade sat sideways across my driveway gate, like it owned the ground beneath it. Engine running, windows tinted so dark they looked like bruises on the October air. I pulled up in my Honda Civic just after 4 in the afternoon, still thinking about the leftover pasta I was going to heat up for dinner, and my whole body went cold before my brain caught up. I parked on the street, got out slowly. 2 men stepped from the front doors of the Cadillac. Big, tailored suits that cost more than my rent. One cracked his knuckles like he was warming up for something. They positioned themselves between me and my own front door, shoulder to shoulder, a human wall. Then the rear door opened and my sister Vanessa stepped out. She was wearing white, not just any white, my white. The exact wedding dress I had tried on 6 days ago at the bridal boutique on Newberry Street. The one with the lace sleeves and the low back that made me cry when I saw myself in the mirror. My dress, on my sister's body, standing in my driveway. And from the other side of the Cadillac, Daniel Moretti unfolded himself into the daylight and placed his hand on my sister's waist like she had always belonged there. Like I was the stranger. Vanessa looked at me and smiled. Not warm, not cruel, just certain. "You've always lived for me, Kayla. This time, I'm just taking back what's mine." I stood there on the sidewalk in front of my own house in Brookline, Massachusetts, holding my work bag and a half-empty coffee cup, and I watched my fiancé wrap his arm around my sister like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Daniel looked at me the way you look at a line item on a budget sheet that didn't perform. No anger, no guilt, just a man crossing something off a list. "The engagement is over, Kayla," he said. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "I've had my attorneys begin the process. The ring, the apartment, the joint accounts. Everything will be handled. I'd prefer this to be civilized." Civilized. The word landed like a slap dressed up in a silk glove. I looked at Vanessa. She was standing tall, chin lifted, one hand resting on Daniel's chest. And that's when I saw them. The pearl earrings. Small, luminous, slightly uneven because they were antique. My grandmother's pearl earrings. Grandma Elaine left them to me specifically in her will, not to Vanessa, not to my mother. To me. The only thing anyone in my family had ever given me that wasn't a hand-me-down or an afterthought. Vanessa was wearing them like they were costume jewelry she'd picked up at a department store. She'd been inside my house. She'd gone through my jewelry box. She'd taken them and put them on before coming here to stand on my doorstep with my fiancé and tell me she was taking what was hers. Daniel gestured to the 2 men flanking my door. "I want this to go smoothly. No scenes, no calls. My legal team will be in touch about the details." The bigger one, the one with the knuckles, spoke for the first time. His voice was flat, practiced. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, ma'am." The way he said it, like he'd said it before, like there was a script and I was just the latest woman to hear it. Vanessa adjusted the dress at the waist and glanced at Daniel like she was waiting for approval. He gave her a small nod. She turned back to me. "You should thank me, Kayla. I saved you from finding out the hard way." Then she got back in the Cadillac. Daniel followed. The 2 men climbed into the front seats. The doors closed. The engine revved once and the car pulled away from my gate, turned left at the end of the block, and disappeared behind the row of oak trees that lined Walnut Hill Road. Vanessa did not look back. None of them did. I stood in my driveway holding a cold cup of coffee and listened to the October wind push dead leaves across the pavement. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I was not going to cry in my own driveway. Not for them. Not for any of them. I looked down at the engagement ring still on my finger. A 4-carat diamond that Daniel had presented to me on one knee at the Liberty Hotel 8 weeks ago, while a string quartet played, and the waitstaff pretended not to watch. I pulled it off slowly and held it in my open palm. It caught the last of the afternoon light. $1.8 million. That's what the lawyers would tell me it was worth when they called in 72 hours demanding its return. I set the ring on the concrete step of my front porch, right next to the welcome mat that said, "Home," in cursive letters. Then I walked inside. The house felt wrong immediately. not ransacked, surgical. Half the bedroom closet was empty, but the hangers were still evenly spaced, like someone had removed every third item over the course of weeks, so the gaps wouldn't be obvious. The bathroom cabinet was cleaned out. My anxiety medication, my backup glasses. My passport was gone from the desk drawer. The external hard drive where I kept personal files, family photos, tax records, gone. Clothes and jewelry I could understand. Vanessa's pettiness had always had a theatrical quality, a flair for the symbolic. But a passport and a hard drive. That wasn't petty. That was strategic. Someone had been in this house multiple times, removing things piece by piece, and I had never noticed because I trusted the people who had keys. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the silence do what silence does when the noise finally stops. It showed me everything I'd missed. The dress fitting was 6 days ago. Vanessa came with me. She helped me zip up the back. She stood behind me in the mirror and said, "You look beautiful, Kay." She called me Kay, the nickname she used when we were kids sharing a bedroom in our parents' house in Newton, back when I still believed she was my best friend. 6 days ago she zipped up my wedding dress and told me I was beautiful. And the whole time she was already wearing Daniel's ring in private. She'd been sleeping with my fiancé for over a year, and she'd stood behind me in that mirror with steady hands and a smile that never flickered. I picked up my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother, Diane. 1 text message. "Vanessa told us everything. Please don't make this ugly, Kayla. Daniel is a good man. Think about the family." 3 missed calls, and not a single one of them was to ask if I was okay. Not one. Think about the family. That phrase had been the background music of my entire life. Think about the family when I gave up my full scholarship to MIT so my parents could redirect the tuition money to help Vanessa attend BU. Think about the family when I co-signed Vanessa's first business loan at 24 and watched her default on it 8 months later while I kept making the payments. Think about the family when Vanessa borrowed $12,000 for an emergency that turned out to be a down payment on a convertible she crashed 3 months later. Think about the family. Always think about the family. Never think about Kayla. 3 months earlier, I still believed I was the luckiest woman in Boston. I need you to understand that, because what comes next doesn't make sense unless you know how completely I believed the lie. My name is Kayla Bennett. I was 32 years old that summer. I worked as a senior cybersecurity engineer at Meridian Defense Systems, a mid-sized defense contractor headquartered in Boston's Seaport District. I was part of a team building a classified encryption system for a Department of Defense contract worth $2.3 billion. The work was intense, technical, and exactly the kind of thing I was built for. I'd been good at systems my whole life, finding patterns, identifying vulnerabilities, building walls that kept the wrong people out. I just never thought to build those walls around my own heart. Daniel Moretti appeared in my life at a charity gala in July, 2 years before the Cadillac showed up at my gate. I didn't want to go to that gala. I hate galas. I hate small talk and canapes and shoes that pinch. But Vanessa insisted. She was working at a financial fund at the time and said it would be good for both of us to be seen. She drove us there. She picked out my dress. She walked me to a table near the back of the ballroom and introduced me to a man in a charcoal suit with silver at his temples and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "Kayla, this is Daniel Moretti. Daniel, this is my little sister, the genius I'm always telling you about." Then Vanessa disappeared for 20 minutes. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Vanessa always disappeared at parties. She'd find someone more interesting to talk to, someone with a bigger name or a thicker wallet, and she'd drift. That was just Vanessa. But now, sitting in my half-empty house with my passport missing and my sister's perfume still lingering in the closet she'd raided, that 20-minute absence looked different. She didn't drift. She delivered me. She walked me to Daniel's table, made the introduction, and left the room so he could work. Daniel pursued me for 5 months before I agreed to a real date. I wasn't playing hard to get. I genuinely didn't trust it. Men like Daniel Moretti didn't chase women like me. I was not glamorous. I was not connected. I was a cybersecurity engineer who spent her weekends reading technical journals and her evenings debugging code. But Daniel was patient. Flowers arrived at my office every Friday. Handwritten letters, not emails, actual letters on heavy cream paper, arrived at my apartment. He remembered everything I said. My favorite author. The name of the dog I had when I was 11. The fact that I drank my coffee black with 1 sugar, never 2. It felt like being seen for the first time in my life by someone who wasn't obligated to look. He proposed 8 weeks before the Cadillac. A private dinner at the Liberty Hotel, a string quartet, a 3-carat diamond ring that caught the candlelight and scattered it across the ceiling like stars. He got on one knee and said, "I've never met anyone like you. You're the only real thing in my life." I cried. I said yes before he finished the sentence. For the first time in 32 years, I believed someone had chosen me. Not because I was useful, not because I was reliable, not because I would sacrifice without complaining, just because I was me. The wedding planning started immediately, and Daniel took over most of it. 300 guests, a venue at the Boston Harbor Hotel, a designer dress, caterers, florists, a 15-piece band. I wanted something small. He wanted something enormous. He won every negotiation with the same warm smile and the same 5 words, "Trust me, I know best." I let him design the whole thing because I'd spent my whole life watching other people take the lead, and I thought that's what love looked like. I understand now. He wasn't planning a wedding, he was building a stage. And I was never the bride, I was the prop. Night had fallen by the time I stopped sitting on my bed and started moving again. The engagement ring was still on the front step where I'd left it. I could see it through the window, catching the porch light, a tiny star sitting on concrete. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. A woman's voice. Clipped. Professional. No warmth. "Ms. Bennett? My name is Jocelyn Park. I'm an attorney representing Moretti Holdings. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Moretti has initiated proceedings to recover the engagement ring, valued at $1.8 million. You have 72 hours to return it to our offices. Failure to comply will result in civil litigation." She hung up before I could respond. 72 hours. They weren't even giving me a full night to grieve before the lawyers circled. This wasn't a breakup. This was a demolition. And every charge had been set long before I heard the first explosion. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. The screen lit up my face in the dark room. I am a woman who builds security systems for a living. I design walls that protect classified information from the most sophisticated threats on Earth. I find the cracks that other people miss. I trace the footprints that other people erase. Daniel Moretti picked me because I had access to secrets. He spent 2 years convincing me I was loved so he could get close to the most sensitive project in my company. He never once considered that the woman he chose as a target spent 10 years learning how to find the truth that powerful people try hardest to hide. He picked me because of what I could give him. He never stopped to think about what I could do to him. I showed up at Meridian Defense Systems at 7:45 the next morning because I didn't know what else to do. My badge had worked at the parking garage gate every day for 6 years. I'd swiped it so many times the plastic was wearing thin at the corner where my thumb pressed. I walked through the main entrance, nodded at the security guard, Gerald, who'd been there longer than me, and headed for the elevator bank. My badge didn't beep. The turnstile didn't move. I swiped again. Nothing. Gerald looked at his screen, then at me, and his face did something I'd never seen before. It folded, like he was watching someone walk into a glass door and couldn't warn them in time. "Ms. Bennett, I need you to wait here for a moment." He picked up the phone. I stood in the lobby of the building where I'd spent 6 years of my life, where I'd designed encryption architecture that protected classified military communications, where I'd worked through weekends and holidays and the flu and a kidney infection because the work mattered and I was good at it, and I waited like a visitor. like a stranger, like someone who didn't belong. Howard Langford came down personally, my direct supervisor. 53 years old, silver-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who wore the same 3 ties in rotation and thought it made him approachable. He'd mentored me since my first week. He'd recommended me for the Project Sentinel team. He'd told me once, over late-night takeout in the office during a deadline crunch, that I was the best engineer he'd ever managed. Howard didn't meet my eyes in the lobby. He walked me to a conference room on the 2nd floor, the one with no windows that we used for classified briefings, and closed the door behind us. "Kayla, we need to talk." He sat across from me and placed a folder on the table. Inside were printouts of system access logs. My name, my employee ID, timestamps showing logins to the Project Sentinel database at 2:14 in the morning, 3:47 in the morning, 1:22 in the morning, dates spanning the last 8 months. These logs show unauthorized access to classified project files from your credentials during off hours, Howard said. His voice was flat, professional, like he was reading from a script someone else had written for him. "The security team flagged it last week. We've conducted a preliminary internal review. Kayla, you're being placed on immediate suspension pending a full investigation into potential unauthorized disclosure of classified defense information." The words didn't register at first. They bounced off the surface of my brain like stones skipping on water. Unauthorized disclosure, suspension. I looked at the timestamps again. 2:14 in the morning, 3:47, 1:22. Those were nights I'd stayed at Daniel's penthouse in Back Bay. Nights I'd fallen asleep in his bed while he told me he loved me and I believed him. My laptop would have been in my bag on the chair by the door. My credentials were saved in the browser because Daniel had watched me type my password once and said, "You should save that, babe. You log in too many times a day to type it every time." I'd thought it was a small kindness, a man who paid attention. I looked at Howard. These logins weren't me. "The credentials are yours, Kayla." "Someone used my credentials while I was asleep. Howard, you know me. You know I would never—" "My hands are tied." He closed the folder. "Security has revoked your access. I need your badge, your laptop, and your building key. You'll be contacted by the investigation team within 5 business days." He paused. For a half-second, something flickered behind his glasses. Not guilt, exactly. Something adjacent to it. Then it was gone. "I'm sorry, Kayla, I really am." I handed over my badge, the one with the worn corner, 6 years of swiping reduced to a piece of plastic in a manila envelope. I walked back through the lobby with Howard beside me like an escort, and Gerald the security guard wouldn't look at me. Nobody would look at me. The people I'd worked beside for years suddenly found their shoes fascinating, their phones urgent, the ceiling tiles worthy of deep study. I stepped outside into the October air and stood on the sidewalk and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, that those access logs were fabricated. Someone had used my credentials from a device that wasn't mine, from a location that wasn't my home, on nights when my laptop was within arm's reach of a man who had 2 years to learn my habits, my passwords, my routines, my trust. Daniel didn't just cheat on me. He used me as a key to a locked door, and now he was framing me for opening it. I sat in my car in the Meridian parking garage and made 3 phone calls. The first was to my bank. The joint investment account Daniel and I had opened 9 months ago, the one where I'd deposited my savings as a gesture of trust, was frozen. Not closed, frozen. His name was the primary account holder. Mine was secondary. I had no access. The second call was to the credit card company. The supplementary card Daniel had given me, the one he'd insisted I carry for emergencies and nice things, Kayla, you deserve nice things, was canceled, terminated as of yesterday. The third call was to the property management office for my apartment in Brookline. My apartment. Except it wasn't. The lease was held by Moretti Properties, LLC. Daniel owned the building. I'd known this when I moved in. He'd said it was convenient, romantic even, that he could take care of the lease, and I could just focus on making it feel like home. I'd thought it was generous. It was a leash. The property manager informed me, with the detached politeness of someone reading from a legal notice, that my occupancy agreement would be terminated in 30 days. Mr. Moretti's office has requested the unit be vacated by November 15th. In 24 hours, I had lost my fiancé, my sister, my job, my savings, my credit card, and my home. Each one removed with surgical precision, like organs being harvested from a body that was still breathing. I called my parents from the parking garage. I don't know why. Hope, maybe. Muscle memory. The desperate, childish belief that when everything falls apart, your mother and father will catch you. My father answered on the second ring. "Kayla." His voice was already armored. "Dad, something terrible is happening. Daniel, Vanessa told us." He cut me off, not gently, like he was closing a door. "She told us about the scene you made at the house yesterday. Kayla, you threw things at Daniel's car. You screamed at Vanessa in front of the neighbors. This is not how we raised you." I hadn't thrown anything. I hadn't screamed. I'd stood on a sidewalk holding a coffee cup and watched my life drive away in a Cadillac. "Dad, that's not what happened. Vanessa is lying. Daniel has been nothing but good to this family." My father's voice hardened, the voice he used when a conversation was over and he was just waiting for the other person to realize it. "He's helped Vanessa's business. He's been generous with your mother and me. And you're going to stand there and tell me the man who gave you a $2 million ring is the villain? Kayla, you need to get control of yourself." I heard my mother in the background. Not her words, just her tone. The soft murmuring she did when she agreed with my father but didn't want to say it out loud. She'd been doing that my entire life, letting Richard Bennett speak for both of them, letting his certainty become hers. "Dad, please listen to me. I've listened enough. Vanessa is upset. Daniel is upset. Your mother is upset. For once in your life, think about someone other than yourself." The line went dead. I sat in the parking garage with the engine off and the windows up, and I breathed, slowly, in and out. The way I'd taught myself to breathe when I was 14, and Vanessa told the entire 8th grade that I'd wet the bed at summer camp, which wasn't true, but truth had never been the point with Vanessa. The point was always to make me smaller. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, 6 words on the screen. "They're not done with you yet. Be careful." I stared at the message for a long time. The number was unfamiliar. The area code was local, 617, Boston. Someone who knew what was happening. Someone who knew more was coming. Someone who, for reasons I couldn't understand, wanted me to be ready. I screenshot the message, saved it to my phone, and drove to the only place I had left to go. Megan Torres opened her apartment door in Scrubs and immediately knew. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't say, "Are you okay?" She looked at my face and stepped aside and said, "Guest room's yours for as long as you need it. I'll put the kettle on." That's Megan. We'd been friends since freshman year at MIT, back when I still had the scholarship before I gave it up for Vanessa. Megan stayed, got her degree, went to nursing school, became an ER nurse at Mass General. She was the kind of person who could hold a bleeding stranger's hand at 3 a.m. and still show up for brunch on Sunday with a smile that hadn't dimmed. She was also the only person in my life who had never once asked me to be less than I was. I told her everything, from the Cadillac to the dress to the earrings to the access logs to the frozen accounts to my father's voice on the phone. Megan listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Kayla, this isn't a breakup. This is an operation. Someone planned this." "I know. What are you going to do?" I opened my laptop on her kitchen table. What I do best. Find the cracks. I started that night, not with emotion, with methodology. The same approach I used at Meridian when analyzing a potential breach. Identify the intrusion point, map the timeline, follow the data. The access logs. Howard showed me listed timestamps across 8 months. I pulled up my personal calendar, cross-referencing every flagged date with my own records. Every single unauthorized login occurred on a night I spent at Daniel's penthouse. Not one exception. Whoever accessed the system used my credentials from a device that connected through an IP address I didn't recognize, but the connection was routed through a VPN configured to appear as if it originated from a device registered to my home network. Someone had cloned my network signature. That required technical knowledge, serious technical knowledge. Not Daniel's level. He was a deal maker, a money man, a face. He didn't build systems. He bought people who did, which meant someone with genuine cybersecurity skills had configured this setup. Someone who understood Meridian's internal network architecture well enough to spoof a connection that fooled the security team's automated monitoring. Someone inside the company. I thought about my team, the people I'd worked with daily on Project Sentinel, 6 engineers, 2 analysts, 1 project coordinator. I trusted all of them. But trust was the currency that had bankrupted me this week, so I set it aside and looked at the data instead. One name kept surfacing in my memory, not because of what he'd done, but because of what he'd stopped doing. Marcus Webb, 36 years old, mid-level systems engineer. He'd been on my team for 3 years. Good work, not exceptional. Quiet, kept to himself. He and I used to grab lunch together once a week, not because we were close friends, but because we were both the kind of people who ate at their desks and occasionally felt guilty about it. 3 weeks ago, Marcus stopped eating lunch with me. He stopped making eye contact in meetings. He started leaving early, something he'd never done in 3 years. And 2 months ago, at a team happy hour at a bar in the seaport, Marcus asked me a question that I'd laughed off at the time but now replayed in my head like a siren. "Hey Kayla, random question. For that presentation I'm putting together on internal architecture, can you walk me through how the Sentinel encryption layers interface with the external access protocols?" I'd explained it, casually, between sips of a gin and tonic, because he was a colleague and it was a reasonable question and I had no reason to guard the answer. Except now, sitting at Megan's kitchen table with my career in ruins, I realized Marcus had never given that presentation. I'd checked the internal share drive twice in the following weeks, and there was nothing. He'd asked for classified architectural details for a presentation that didn't exist. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed someone outside the system. Someone who could dig into the financial and personal connections I couldn't access from a laptop in my friend's guest room. I needed a private investigator. Megan knew someone. Her uncle's former partner on the Boston police force, a man named Frank DeLuca, 58 years old, retired from the force after 30 years, the last 12 in the financial crimes unit. Now he worked private cases out of a one-room office in Dorchester above a dry cleaner. I called him. His voice was gravel and black coffee. I gave him the short version. He was quiet for 10 seconds after I finished, which I would learn was Frank's way of deciding whether you were worth his time. "Ms. Bennett, if your target is Daniel Moretti, you need to understand something. I've seen his name come across desks for years. Never enough to stick, but always enough to notice. The man doesn't leave fingerprints. He leaves other people's fingerprints." "I know. He left mine." Another pause. "Come to my office tomorrow. Bring everything you have. And Ms. Bennett, if this goes where I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Probably a lot worse." "I don't have anything left to lose, Mr. DeLuca." Yeah, that's what people always say right before they find out they do. That evening I drove to Newton. I didn't plan to. I was on my way to pick up takeout from the Thai place on Washington Street, and I found myself turning onto my parents' block without deciding to. Muscle memory or masochism, I couldn't tell the difference. I slowed as I passed the house. A colonial with white trim, the lawn still green despite October, the American flag hanging limp on the porch. The house where I learned to ride a bike, where I practiced piano scales until my fingers ached, where I sat at the kids' table at Thanksgiving until I was 26 because Vanessa's friends needed the chairs at the adult table, and someone had to make room, and it was always me. Daniel's Cadillac was parked in the driveway, the same Cadillac, in my parents' driveway like it had been there 100 times. I stopped the car across the street and looked through the dining room window. The chandelier was on, the one my mother saved for holidays and special occasions. Through the glass I could see them. My mother at the head of the table setting down a serving dish. My father at the other end pouring wine. Vanessa on one side laughing at something, her hand on Daniel's arm. Daniel beside her, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never been refused entry to any room. They were having dinner. A family dinner. 4 days after Vanessa stole my fiancé, 3 days after my parents told me to get control of myself, my family was sitting around the dining room table with the man who was systematically destroying my life, and they were eating pot roast under the good chandelier. Vanessa was sitting in my chair, the one on the left side, closest to the kitchen, the seat I'd occupied at every family meal for as long as I could remember. She was sitting in it with her back straight and her wine glass raised, and my mother was smiling at her, and my father was carving meat, and Daniel Moretti was watching all of it with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has purchased exactly what he wanted. I sat in my car across the street and watched my family replace me over pot roast. They didn't draw the curtains. They didn't think they needed to, because in their minds, I was already gone. I was already the version of the story Vanessa had told them, the hysterical little sister who made a scene and needed to be managed. They'd closed ranks so fast it was like I'd never been inside them. I put the car in drive and pulled away. I didn't cry. I drove back to Megan's apartment, heated up leftover soup, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and Frank DeLuca's number in my phone, and the anonymous text message glowing on the screen beside me. "They're not done with you yet. Be careful." No, they weren't done with me. But I wasn't done either. Not even close. Frank DeLuca's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. He'd been working my case for 4 days, and when I walked in that Thursday morning, there were 3 folders on his desk instead of the usual one. He didn't greet me. He just pointed at the chair across from him and slid the first folder over. "Sit down, Ms. Bennett. We've got a lot to cover and none of it's going to make you feel better." Inside the first folder were photographs. Vanessa and Daniel at a restaurant in the back bay, her hand on his knee under the table, his mouth close to her ear. A hotel receipt from the Four Seasons dated 14 months ago, charged to a corporate card under Moretti Holdings. Flight manifests showing Vanessa and Daniel on the same private jet to Miami, to Aspen, to the Bahamas, going back 18 months. 18 months. Vanessa had been sleeping with my fiancé for a year and a half, 6 months longer than I'd even known Daniel existed in any romantic sense. She wasn't the woman who stole my fiancé. She was the woman who had him first. "The affair's the surface," Frank said, watching me flip through the photos with hands I forced to stay steady. "It's ugly, but it's not the story. The story is in folder 2. I opened it. Financial records, corporate filings, employment history. Vanessa Bennett had worked as a financial assistant at Moretti Capital, Daniel's private investment fund, for 11 months. She started 3 years ago. She left the position 14 months ago, right around the time the hotel receipts began. On paper, she'd been a low-level employee who moved on to start her own interior design business, Bennett and Bloom Interiors. In reality, the timeline told a different story. Vanessa was inside Daniel's organization for nearly a year before the affair began. She had access to his files, his contacts, his strategy, and her interior design company, the one my parents were so proud of, the one I'd co-signed a loan for, was funded by a $500,000 investment from the Moretti Foundation that Frank traced through a shell company called Beacon Row Holdings. "She didn't just work for him," I said. "She was recruited." "That's my read," Frank said. "Moretti doesn't hire assistants through normal channels. He headhunts. He finds people with access to things he wants and brings them inside his operation. Your sister had access to something very valuable." "Me. You." Frank opened the third folder, and I felt the ground shift under my chair. "This is where it gets bad, Ms. Bennett. Moretti didn't start with you." Inside were newspaper clippings, court documents, and a printed LinkedIn profile. Dr. Natalie Chen, 38 years old, former senior systems engineer at Harman Dynamics, a defense contractor based in Arlington, Virginia. 4 years ago, Natalie was terminated after an internal investigation found evidence of unauthorized access to classified project files. The access logs showed her credentials being used during off hours from locations inconsistent with her home address. She was fired, her security clearance was revoked, and her professional reputation was destroyed. She fought it for 8 months, filed appeals, hired lawyers, but the evidence was ironclad and no one believed her. She moved to Baltimore, took a job at a fraction of her former salary, and disappeared from the defense industry entirely. The pattern was identical: the off-hours access logs, the credentials used from a spoofed location, the swift termination, the destroyed career, the isolation. Same method, same result, same architect. "How did you find her?" I asked. Moretti's legal counsel on the Natalie Chen situation was a firm called Hale & Associates. Lead attorney Victor Hale. Same Victor Hale who currently represents Daniel Moretti on all his domestic legal matters. Same Victor Hale whose firm sent you the letter demanding the engagement ring back. Frank leaned forward. "Ms. Bennett, Moretti has a playbook. He targets women with security clearance at defense contractors. He gets close to them through romantic relationships. He extracts what he needs. And when they're used up, he frames them for the breach and moves on. You're not his first target. You're his second, at least." The room felt very small. I looked at Natalie Chen's LinkedIn photo. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a professional smile that didn't quite reach the corners of her mouth. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones when no one believes you for long enough. "I need to talk to her," I said. "Already found her address. She's in Baltimore. Small apartment in Fells Point." Frank paused. "But Kayla, I need to warn you. When I called her to ask about Moretti, she hung up on me. Called back 20 minutes later and said she'd talk, but only in person, and only if I could prove I wasn't working for him. She's scared. 4 years later, she's still scared." "I'll drive to Baltimore tomorrow." "One more thing." Frank's voice dropped. "Last night, I got a call from a contact at Meridian. Off the record. Your suspension didn't originate internally. The investigation into your access logs was initiated after an outside request. Someone contacted Meridian's legal department and recommended they audit your credentials specifically. The request came through a law firm. Hale & Associates. Hale & Associates. My phone rang as I was leaving Frank's office. The caller ID said Meridian Defense. I answered expecting HR or the investigation team. Instead, I heard a voice I knew well. Howard Langford, my supervisor. The man who'd taken my badge and walked me out of the building. But his tone was different now. Lower, faster. Like a man speaking into a phone he didn't want anyone to see him holding. "Kayla, I can't talk long. I need you to listen." "Howard. The investigation into your access logs. It didn't come from security. It didn't come from our team. Someone outside the company made a formal request to our legal department, and legal ordered the audit. I was told to initiate the suspension. I pushed back. I told them your record was impeccable. They said it didn't matter. The request came with documentation that made it impossible to ignore." "Who made the request?" "I can't say that on the phone. All I can tell you is that I was given a letter to sign, a recommendation for immediate suspension based on the audit findings. I didn't write it. I didn't investigate it. I was handed a finished document and told to sign it and deliver the news." "Howard, you could have warned me." Silence. Then, "I have a family, Kayla, a mortgage, 2 kids in college." When the letter landed on my desk, it came with an implication. Not a threat. An implication. The kind that doesn't need to be said out loud. He paused. "I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than you know. But I can't do more than this." The line went dead. I sat in my car outside Frank's office and replayed his words. Howard hadn't just been pressured, he'd been afraid. And whatever scared a man who'd spent 30 years in defense contracting was bigger than a jealous ex-fiancé settling a personal score. This was institutional. This was organized. And whoever was pulling the strings had enough power to reach inside a classified defense contractor and rearrange the furniture without leaving a mark. The next morning I drove to Baltimore. 3.5 hours on I-95 with nothing but my thoughts and a thermos of gas station coffee. I replayed everything. The charity gala where Vanessa introduced me to Daniel. The 20 minutes she disappeared. The 2 years of pursuit. The flowers, the letters, the weekend trips. The proposal, the access logs, the framing, Howard's phone call. Every piece fit together like a circuit board. Each connection deliberate, each pathway designed to carry information in one direction, from me to Daniel, and to carry blame in the other direction, from Daniel to me. Natalie Chen lived in a third-floor walk-up in Fells Point, a neighborhood of cobblestone streets and brick row houses that smelled like the harbor. She opened the door on the chain and looked at me through the gap for a full 10 seconds before letting me in. She was thinner than her LinkedIn photo. Her apartment was clean but sparse, the kind of space that belongs to someone who stopped decorating because they stopped planning to stay. We sat at her kitchen table and she poured me water from a filtered pitcher and didn't speak until I did. I told her everything. The Cadillac, the dress, the access logs, Frank's findings, the identical pattern. She listened without expression, her hands wrapped around her water glass. And when I finished, she closed her eyes for a moment and breathed out through her nose like she was deflating. 4 years, she said. 4 years I've been telling myself it was over, that I'd moved on, and here you are sitting at my kitchen table telling me it's still happening. She opened her eyes. His name was David when I knew him. David Moran. That's the name he used. Charming, persistent, made me feel like I was the center of the universe. We dated for a year. He proposed after 8 months. I said yes. She paused. Same playbook? Same playbook, I said. He destroyed my life and no one believed me, Natalie said, her voice flat, factual, like she was reading a weather report about a hurricane that had already passed. They said I was paranoid. My family pulled away. My friends got tired of hearing about it. My lawyer told me to take a settlement and move on because fighting it would cost more than I'd ever recover. So I moved on, moved here, got a job doing IT consulting for a company that makes dental software. I went from protecting military communications to debugging appointment schedulers. She looked at me. What do you want from me, Kayla? Everything you have, emails, documents, notes, anything you saved from when it happened. I saved everything, she said. She stood and went to her bedroom closet, came back with a cardboard box, the kind you buy at an office supply store, taped shut with packing tape that had yellowed with age. I kept it because I knew someone else would show up eventually. I just didn't think it would take 4 years. We spent 2 hours going through the box. Printed emails between David Moran and a law firm, Hale and Associates. The language was clinical, corporate. Asset management, liability containment, separation protocol. Natalie was never referred to by name. She was the subject, or NC. In one email from Victor Hale to Daniel's office, dated 4 years ago, the line read, "Subject has been neutralized. Recommend standard separation protocol. No further engagement necessary." Neutralized. Like she was a threat that had been diffused, like she was a malfunction in a system that needed to be patched and forgotten. I was reading my own future in the language of Natalie's past. Somewhere in Daniel's files, there was probably an email that said the same thing about me. Subject KB, neutralized. Standard separation protocol. Move on to the next one. As I was putting the last of the documents back into the box, Natalie grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger than I expected. Kayla, there's something I never told anyone. The night before I was fired, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was taken except my work laptop and my phone. And there was a note on my kitchen counter. Just one sentence. Walk away and this ends. Did you call the police? Who was going to believe me? I was already the unstable ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept a breakup. That's the story they'd built. By the time they were done, even I started wondering if maybe I was crazy. She let go of my wrist. Be careful, Kayla. Daniel doesn't just ruin lives. He erases people. And when he's done with you, the world forgets you ever existed. I drove back to Boston with Natalie's box on the passenger seat and her words in my ears. He erases people. Not ruins. Erases. Like pencil marks on paper. Like you were never there at all. 3 days after Marcus Webb confessed to me in the Cambridge Cafe, I was sitting at Megan's kitchen table at 6 in the morning, organizing everything I had into a timeline on my laptop, when my burner phone buzzed. Same unknown number as the anonymous message from my first day of exile. This time the message was longer. Check the Moretti Foundation donor list. Your parents' names are on it. They knew before you did. All of them. I stared at the screen. Whoever was sending these messages knew about my parents specifically. Not just that they'd sided with Vanessa. Not just that they'd taken Daniel's calls. They knew about financial connections between the Moretti Foundation and my family. This wasn't a random whistleblower with a guilty conscience. This was someone with direct access to Daniel's financial operations, who also knew the details of my family relationships. The intersection of those two circles was very small. I tried tracing the message. 3 VPN layers, professionally masked, rotating IP addresses. Whoever built this routing knew what they were doing or had hired someone who did. I saved the metadata for analysis and called Frank. He called back at 7. His voice was different. The gravel was still there, but something heavier sat underneath it. Kayla, come to my office. Not over the phone. I drove to Dorchester. Frank slid a folder across his desk, and I was starting to understand that Frank communicated bad news the way other people communicated weather. Matter-of-factly, without cushioning, because cushioning wasted time that could be spent doing something about it. Inside the folder were financial records from the Moretti Foundation's public filings, cross-referenced with corporate registration documents Frank had pulled through his contacts. A $500,000 payment from the Moretti Foundation, routed through Beacon Row Holdings, deposited into the operating account of Bennett and Bloom Interiors, Vanessa's company, 6 months before Daniel proposed to me. The investment predates the proposal, Frank said. That means the arrangement between Daniel and your family was locked in before he ever put a ring on your finger. The proposal wasn't the start of anything. It was a milestone in something that had been running for months. My parents knew. Before the ring. Before the gala. Before Daniel kissed me for the first time and told me I was extraordinary. My parents knew he was coming for me, and they took his money and set the table and watched. I drove to Newton without calling ahead. The colonial with the white trim and the American flag looked the same as it always did. Neat and composed. A house that performed stability for the neighbors. My father opened the door, surprised. My mother was in the kitchen. The house smelled like pot roast. Vanessa's favorite, never mine. I walked past my father into the hallway and stopped. On the hallway table, in a silver frame I'd never noticed before, was a photograph of Vanessa and Daniel at what looked like a Moretti Foundation event. Black tie, her arm through his, both smiling. Vanessa's hair was shorter in the photo, the bob she'd worn last year before she grew it out. This photo was at least a year old. It had been sitting on my parents' hallway table, openly displayed for months. I had walked past it every time I visited this house during my engagement to Daniel. I'd walked past a photograph of my fiancé with my sister, and never looked closely enough to see it because it never occurred to me that I needed to. I placed Frank's financial documents on the kitchen table. $500,000, Mom, from Daniel's foundation into Vanessa's company, 6 months before he proposed to me. My mother's hands froze on the dish towel she was holding. My father came in from the hallway, saw the papers, and his jaw tightened the way it always did when reality contradicted the story he preferred. The confrontation lasted 12 minutes. I know because I checked the clock afterward. 12 minutes to dismantle 32 years of illusion. My mother cried, but she did not deny. She called it an investment, not a bribe. She said Daniel believed in Vanessa's potential. She said I was twisting everything because I was hurt. My father was harder, louder, the way he always got when he felt cornered. Daniel brought more to this family in 1 year than you have in 32. He gave Vanessa a chance. He gave us stability. What have you ever given us, Kayla? Bills, worry, a daughter who was always too busy with her computers to pick up the phone. I absorbed it. I'd heard versions of this my whole life. That I wasn't enough. That Vanessa needed more. That the family's needs outweighed mine. But this time there was arithmetic attached. This time I could put a dollar figure on my own erasure. $500,000. That's what my family cost. That's the price they accepted to stay quiet while a man dismantled their youngest daughter's life from the inside. I asked one question. Did you know Daniel was using me to access classified defense projects? My father hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2. But I'm trained to notice gaps in systems, and a 2-second pause from Richard Bennett was a canyon. My mother looked at the floor. Neither answered directly. My father said, "We didn't ask questions. Daniel said he needed you close to certain business interests. We assumed it was networking." You assumed? You didn't ask, because you didn't care what happened to me as long as the money kept flowing into Vanessa's company. The front door opened. Vanessa walked in carrying a shopping bag and wearing sunglasses pushed up on her head like a crown. She had a key. She came and went freely. This was still her house in every way that mattered, and it had never been mine. She saw me, saw the documents on the table, saw our mother crying and our father red-faced. She set her bag down on the counter, poured herself a glass of water from the Brita filter, took a sip and said, "You've always lived for me, Kayla. You should be used to it by now. If anything, you should be grateful. I gave your life a purpose." The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. My mother flinched. My father looked away. And Vanessa stood there drinking water in our mother's kitchen with the same expression she'd worn in the Cadillac. The same expression she'd worn at the dress fitting when she zipped me up and told me I was beautiful, serene, certain, untouchable. She genuinely believed it. She had rewritten the history of our family so completely that she saw herself as the sun and me as a moon that existed only to reflect her light. And the silence from both my parents confirmed that they'd been reading the same script. I stood up. I looked at all three of them. My mother clutching a dish towel and crying tears that were for herself, not for me. My father rigid with the self-righteousness of a man who has never once admitted he was wrong. My sister drinking water like this was a Tuesday. "I spent my whole life thinking I wasn't enough for this family," I said. "Turns out I was worth exactly $500,000 to you. Now I know the price, and you're going to wish it was higher." I walked out of that house, and I did not look back. I did not close the door gently. That evening, I met Marcus Webb at the Cambridge Cafe. He looked worse than the last time. Dark circles that looked like bruises, weight loss visible in his neck and wrists, a tremor in his hands when he lifted his coffee cup. He'd been sleeping in his car for 2 nights because he was afraid to go home. He handed me the notarized statement, 8 pages, confirming he'd created the fake access logs under Daniel's coercion. But he wasn't done. He'd been carrying something heavier, and I watched him work up to it the way you watch someone approach the edge of a diving board. "Kayla, when Daniel first contacted me, it wasn't a phone call. It wasn't an email. It was your sister." I set my coffee down. "Vanessa came to a company happy hour about 18 months ago. I didn't know who she was. She was friendly, flirtatious. She knew about my gambling debt, details she couldn't have known unless she had access to background check records or internal HR files. She knew the amount. She knew the creditors. She talked about it casually, like it was something everybody knew, and when I panicked, she told me she knew someone who could make it go away." Marcus's hands trembled. "She introduced me to Daniel 2 weeks later at a private dinner. Daniel offered to clear the full $200,000 in exchange for what he called small favors. I thought it meant data entry or moving some files around. It escalated. Marcus, who else is involved?" He looked at me and I saw something beyond fear. I saw a man standing at the edge of a truth he couldn't take back. "There's someone else inside Meridian, someone higher than me. I never met them directly, but Daniel mentioned them once. He called them Gatekeeper. Said Gatekeeper had been feeding information for over 2 years. Before me. Before you were even engaged." The word settled into the air between us like smoke. Gatekeeper. Someone senior. Someone with clearance above mine. Someone who'd been operating inside Meridian Defense for 2 years without triggering a single alarm. And Daniel trusted this person more than anyone else in his network. More than Vanessa. More than Marcus. "Do you know who it is?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "All I know is Daniel talked about Gatekeeper like they were untouchable. Like even if everything else fell apart, Gatekeeper would keep the pipeline open." I told Marcus to go to the motel in New Hampshire. I gave him cash and the address Frank had arranged. I told him not to contact anyone except me or Frank. "And Marcus, if you disappear on me, I can't protect you. Do you understand?" He nodded, took the cash, left through the back door. I returned to Megan's apartment at 10 that night. The street was quiet. The kind of early autumn quiet that feels like the city is holding its breath. I parked and walked toward the building entrance and stopped. A black sedan sat 50 yards down the block. Engine off. Lights off. But through the tinted windshield, I could see the faint glow of a phone screen illuminating someone's face. I walked past it without looking directly at it. Memorized the plate number. Went inside. Megan was in the kitchen, standing by the counter with her phone in her hand, and an expression I hadn't seen on her face since the night she told me about her mother's cancer diagnosis. "Kayla, I didn't want to scare you, but that car has been there for 3 nights. And yesterday someone called the front desk at Mass General and asked which shifts I work. They said it was for a legal matter, but they didn't give a name or a firm." I looked through the window. The sedan hadn't moved. Whoever was inside was patient and professional and had been surveilling Megan's apartment long enough to establish a pattern. This wasn't about watching me. They were mapping everyone around me. Megan's schedule, Megan's workplace, Megan's vulnerabilities. She was being profiled, not because she'd done anything, but because she was the last person standing next to me. I photographed the car from the window using a telephoto lens Megan's ex had left behind, ran the plate through a public records database, and hit a dead end. Rental car. Enterprise location in Cambridge. Probably paid with a corporate card that led to a shell company that led to nothing. I sent the plate number to Frank. Then I sat with Megan in the dark living room, blinds drawn, and she said what I'd been dreading. "I'm not going to tell you to stop, but I need you to know that I'm scared." I took her hand. "You're the only person who believed me from the beginning. I won't let them touch you." "I know," she said, "that's what scares me, that you'd put yourself between me and a bullet." We sat in the dark and listened to the city breathe outside the closed blinds, and neither of us said what we were both thinking, that the circle of safety around me was shrinking every day and the people still standing inside it were running out of room. After Megan went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my laptop screen until the connection stopped swimming and started forming shapes. Frank's financial trail, Marcus's confession, Natalie's box of evidence, the anonymous messages, the surveillance car, Howard's terrified phone call, and the word that sat at the center of everything like a spider in a web. Gatekeeper. Someone senior at Meridian Defense. Someone with level 4 clearance or above. Someone who'd been there longer than me, longer than my engagement, longer than Daniel's interest in Meridian's encryption technology. Someone invisible. I pulled up the Meridian internal directory from memory and started a list of names. Level 4 clearance holders, 6 people in the entire company. I was one. The CTO, the CEO, 2 division directors, and Howard Langford. My phone buzzed. "Marcus, sent 2 minutes ago." "I'm at the motel. I'm safe." "But Kayla, I forgot to tell you something. The hard drive I copied from Daniel's office. I still have it. I was too scared to mention it today. It has everything. Emails, names, dates. Gatekeeper's real identity. I think it's someone you know." I read the message 3 times. Then I closed my eyes and pressed my forehead against the cool surface of the kitchen table and let the weight of it settle over me. Someone I knew. Someone I'd worked beside, eaten lunch with, trusted with my career and my safety and my future. Someone who smiled at me every day while selling me to the man who was dismantling my life. 4 days ago, I had lost everything. Tonight I was closer to the truth than I'd ever been. And the truth I was beginning to understand was going to hurt worse than the lies. I called the FBI field office in Boston at 8:12 in the morning from a burner phone I'd bought at a CVS in Somerville. I asked for the counterintelligence division. The woman who answered transferred me twice, put me on hold for 6 minutes, and I almost hung up because the hold music was a tinny rendition of something classical that sounded like it was being played through a paper towel tube. Then a voice came on. Clear, direct, no filler. Special Agent Rachel Dominguez, Counterintelligence Division. I gave her the compressed version. Senior cybersecurity engineer at a defense contractor, framed for a data breach by my ex-fiancé, a billionaire real estate developer. Evidence of a larger espionage operation targeting multiple defense firms over at least 4 years. A cooperating witness, financial records, a pattern. Rachel listened without interrupting, which I would learn was her signature. Most people fill silence with noise. Rachel Dominguez filled it with attention. When I finished, she said, "Ms. Bennett, can you come in today?" "Not tomorrow, today." I said yes, and was at the FBI Boston field office on Center Plaza by 10:30. Rachel Dominguez was late 40s, lean, with dark hair pulled back tight, and eyes that moved like security cameras, smooth, constant, missing nothing. She led me through 2 security checkpoints and down a hallway that smelled like recycled air and institutional carpet, into a conference room with no windows and a table that could seat 8, but held only 2 chairs. She placed a digital recorder between us and sat down. "Before you start, I want you to know something. You're not the first person to walk in here about Daniel Moretti." My stomach dropped and rose at the same time. The FBI already knew his name. I wasn't bringing them news. I was confirming something they'd been watching from a distance, trying to build a case around for months. "How long?" I asked. "I can't give you specifics, but approximately 8 months. Suspected economic espionage, money laundering through real estate holdings, improper access to defense technology through civilian contractors." She paused. "We have fragments, financial anomalies, suspicious connections between Moretti's companies and foreign intermediaries. But we don't have an inside witness. We don't have hard evidence from within the target companies. Everything we have is circumstantial, and circumstantial doesn't get arrest warrants for a man with Daniel Moretti's legal resources." I opened my bag and laid it out. Marcus Webb's notarized confession about the fabricated access logs. Frank DeLuca's financial trail connecting the Moretti Foundation to my parents' and Vanessa's company through Beacon Row Holdings. The documents from Natalie Chen's box, including Victor Hale's emails about subject neutralization and separation protocol. The pattern, 2 women, 2 defense contractors, identical methods, identical outcomes. And the name. There's someone inside Meridian Defense, a mole. Daniel calls them gatekeeper. They've been operating for at least 2 years, possibly longer. Rachel's expression shifted when I said the word. It was small, controlled, the kind of micro-reaction that most people wouldn't catch. But I'd spent 10 years reading systems for anomalies, and a human face is just another system. She'd heard the name before. The FBI knew Gatekeeper existed but couldn't identify who was behind it. I was the missing variable. "Mrs. Bennett," Rachel said, after reviewing the documents for several minutes, "what you're describing could be the break we've been waiting for. But I have to be transparent. If you cooperate formally, if you become a federal witness, Daniel Moretti will know, his legal team will know, and based on what we've observed, his response to perceived threats is aggressive and immediate." "He already took my job, my home, my family, and my fiancé," I said. "What's left to lose?" Rachel looked at me steadily. "Your safety, and the safety of the people around you." I thought about Megan, the black sedan outside her apartment, the calls to her hospital. "I understand the risk," I said. "I'm not asking you to protect me from it. I'm asking you to use what I'm giving you before he does it to someone else." I was leaving the FBI building, walking down the front steps into the midday sun, when Megan called. Her voice was tight, controlled the way it gets when she's managing a crisis in the ER and can't afford to panic. "Kayla, have you seen the news?" I pulled out my phone. A Boston Globe feature article, posted 2 hours ago. The headline hit me like a fist wrapped in newsprint. Former defense contractor employee under investigation for data breach claims billionaire ex-fiancé framed her. Sources say otherwise. I stood on the sidewalk and read it. The article was a demolition job disguised as journalism. Anonymous sources close to the Moretti family described me as obsessive, unable to accept the end of the relationship, increasingly erratic since the engagement ended. The writer quoted a family member who asked not to be named, saying I had a history of emotional volatility. And then, buried in the fourth paragraph like a knife slipped between ribs, a detail that made my vision blur. The article mentioned that I had been prescribed anxiety medication, implying a pattern of mental instability. My anxiety medication. The bottles that vanished from my bathroom cabinet when the house was surgically emptied in October. Someone hadn't just taken them to destabilize me. They'd taken the prescription labels, the pharmacy information, the dosage records, and fed them to a reporter as evidence that I was falling apart. The theft wasn't petty. It was ammunition. The article quoted Vanessa directly. My sister needs professional help. I love her, but she's been spiraling since the engagement ended. I'm worried about her safety, and honestly about the safety of people around her. The concerned sister performance, pitch perfect. Vanessa sounded caring, not cruel. Worried, not vindictive. A reader scrolling through the Globe on their lunch break would see a troubled young woman and a compassionate older sister trying to help. They wouldn't see the Cadillac, they wouldn't see the wedding dress, they wouldn't see the pearl earrings or the $500,000, or the email that said, "Subject has been neutralized." I scrolled through the comments because I am a human being, and human beings do stupid things when they're hurt. Most of them sided with Vanessa. This poor woman needs therapy, not a lawsuit. Another gold digger mad she got dumped by a billionaire. The sister sounds like a saint for putting up with this. Classic scorned woman syndrome. Each comment was a small incision. I closed the phone. I did not read anymore. The professional fallout came fast. Megan called again an hour later. Mass General Hospital had received 3 anonymous phone calls that morning. The first accused Megan of harboring a person under federal investigation and demanded to know if the hospital condoned such behavior from its nursing staff. The second requested Megan's shift schedule for a legal matter, but refused to provide a name or firm. The third was the simplest and the worst. A man's voice, calm, unhurried. Tell your friend to stop before someone gets hurt. Megan's supervisor had called her in and told her, with the discomfort of a man who didn't want to be involved, that she needed to sort out her personal life before it affected the department. Megan was holding. But holding has a shelf life. I called Frank. They're going after Megan now. They're cutting your support network, Frank said, his voice flat with recognition. Standard playbook for people with Moretti's resources. Isolate the target, remove every ally, make it so expensive and painful to stand next to you that everyone steps away. Then they crush you alone. How do I stop it? You move faster than they expect. I drove to Baltimore the next morning. Not just to warn Natalie that the FBI investigation was accelerating and her name might surface publicly. I needed her files again, her old emails, her contacts, anything from 4 years ago that might connect to what was happening now. Natalie opened the door looking like she hadn't slept since my last visit. She'd seen the Globe article. "It's happening again," she said. She didn't mean to me, she meant to herself. Watching my story in the news had pulled the stitches out of wounds she'd spent 4 years closing. The same playbook, the media, the anonymous sources, the concerned family members. They did exactly this to me in Virginia. By the time I fought back, no one was listening anymore. Natalie retrieved the box from her closet, the same cardboard box she'd shown me before, but this time she dug deeper, pulling out a flash drive and a stack of handwritten notes she'd made during the worst months. I saved everything because I knew one day someone else would need it, she said. I just didn't think it would take 4 years. I went through the materials at her kitchen table. In the printed email chains between Daniel's office and Victor Hale's firm, I found what I was looking for. The language was clean, corporate, the kind of writing designed to say everything while admitting nothing. Asset management. Liability containment. Recommend standard separation protocol. One email from Hale to Daniel's office read, "Subject has been neutralized. No further engagement necessary. Recommend archiving all communications related to NC and transitioning focus to pipeline development." Pipeline development. That meant there was a process, a system for identifying, targeting, and discarding women. Natalie wasn't a one-time mistake. She was a product line that had been retired and replaced. Natalie grabbed my arm as I was packing the files. Her fingers pressed into my wrist hard enough that I felt her pulse against mine. "Kayla, there's one more thing. Something I never told the lawyers, never told the police, never told anyone." She let go and sat back, crossing her arms like she was holding herself together. "The night before I was fired, someone broke into my apartment. I came home and the door was unlocked. Nothing looked wrong at first. But my work laptop was gone. My phone was gone. And on the kitchen counter there was a note. White paper, printed, no handwriting. One sentence. "Walk away, and this ends." "Did you report it?" "To who?" By that point I was already the unstable ex-girlfriend, the woman who couldn't accept a breakup. That's the story they built around me, and it was airtight. Any report I filed would have been filed away as evidence of my paranoia. She paused. "Kayla, be careful. Daniel doesn't just ruin lives. He erases people. When he's done with you, the world forgets you existed." I drove back to Boston with her words filling the car like smoke. He erases people. 4 years later, Natalie Chen was alive but invisible. A ghost in a third-floor walk-up doing IT support for a dental software company. Everything she'd built, her career, her credibility, her identity, had been compressed into a single line in a lawyer's email and filed away under neutralized. That night, I tried Marcus. His number rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I texted, "Marcus, I need confirmation you're okay. Call me." 30 minutes. Nothing. The apartment was quiet. Megan was working a night shift. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone face up on the surface, watching it not ring. I called Frank. He tried the motel directly. The front desk said Marcus checked out 6 hours ago, left in a hurry. Didn't say where he was going, didn't leave a forwarding number, just grabbed his bag and walked to his car and drove. Frank ran Marcus's credit card. Last charge was at a gas station in Concord, New Hampshire, heading north on I-93. After that, nothing. His phone was off or dead. 2 possibilities, Frank said. He panicked and bolted. Or someone found him first. He has the hard drive, Frank. I know. If Daniel's people got to him, that evidence is gone. Gatekeeper's identity is gone. Everything we need to make this case is on that drive. I know that too. Silence on the line. Kayla, we've still got Marcus's notarized statement. We've got my financial records. We've got Natalie's documents. We've got the FBI investigation. The hard drive would have been the crown jewel, but we're not dead in the water without it. We're close to dead. Close isn't dead. I sat in my car in Megan's parking lot after Frank hung up. Rain had started, light and steady, the kind that doesn't know when to stop. I watched it bead on the windshield and thought about Natalie's words. He erases people. Marcus could be erased right now, vanishing into the White Mountains with a hard drive full of evidence and a head full of fear, slowly becoming another person who tried to fight Daniel Moretti and disappeared. For the first time since the Cadillac pulled up to my gate, I considered the possibility that I might lose. That Daniel was too insulated, too connected, too lawyered up to be brought down by one woman with a laptop and a retired cop and a box of 4-year-old emails. That the FBI might be too slow, that Marcus might never surface, that my family would never believe me because believing me would cost them $500,000 and the comfort of the story they'd chosen. The doubt was real, and it was heavy, and it sat on my chest like a stone. Then I went inside, opened my laptop, and looked at the map I'd been building. Names, dates, money flows, connection lines drawn between Daniel, Vanessa, Victor Hale, Marcus, Natalie, Howard, my parents, Meridian Defense. The map was incomplete. It had holes where the hard drive should have been, where Gatekeeper's identity should have been. But it was more than Natalie ever had, more than anyone had ever assembled against Daniel Moretti. And I had something else. Something Daniel's algorithms hadn't accounted for. I knew the pattern now. I'd seen it from the inside, and from 4 years in the past, and from the wreckage of 2 women's lives. I knew how he operated, how he selected, how he approached, how he extracted, how he framed, how he erased. And patterns, once identified, can be predicted. And predictions can be weaponized. Just before midnight, my burner phone lit up. Same unknown number, longer message this time. Marcus is alive. He ran on his own. The hard drive is still with him. But you need to find him before Friday. After Friday, it won't matter. Daniel is planning to leave the country. Once he's gone, Gatekeeper disappears, and you'll never prove anything. You're running out of time. I read it 3 times, screenshotted it, sent it to Frank and Rachel simultaneously. Then, for the first time, I typed a reply. Who are you? 3 dots appeared on the screen. Someone was typing. My heart hammered against my ribs. The dots pulsed for 5 seconds. 10, 15. Then they stopped. No message came. Whoever was feeding me information had just handed me a clock. 4 days. 4 days to find Marcus, recover the hard drive, expose Gatekeeper, and bring down a man who had spent a decade erasing women like me. I didn't know if 4 days was enough, but I knew one thing with the kind of certainty that lives in your bones, not your brain. I was done waiting for someone else to save me. Wednesday morning, 2 days before the anonymous sender's Friday deadline. Frank picked me up at Megan's apartment at 6 a.m. in his 10-year-old Ford Taurus that smelled like pine air freshener and the ghost of 1,000 stakeouts. We drove north on I-93 toward New Hampshire, chasing a man who didn't want to be found with evidence that could bring down an empire. The motel in Nashua was a 2-story cinder block rectangle off Route 101A, the kind of place that charged by the night and didn't ask questions. Marcus's room had been cleaned. The front desk clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, confirmed he'd left around 4 p.m. 2 days ago. Alone. Looked agitated. Carried a backpack and a laptop bag. Didn't say where he was going. Paid cash for his last night. Frank showed his old badge, the retired one that still opened doors when you flashed it fast enough, and the clerk let us check the room. Nothing. Sheets changed, trash emptied, minibar untouched. He'd left clean. Frank drove us to the gas station in Concord, where Marcus's last credit card charge had pinged, a Sunoco on the edge of the highway. Frank talked to the manager, showed Marcus's photo on his phone, and got access to the security footage. There he was, time-stamped 37 hours ago, alone, no one following him. He filled his tank, went inside, bought a bottle of water and a pack of cigarettes, came back out, got in his car, and drove north. His face on the footage was the face of a man running from something he couldn't see, not hurt, not restrained, terrified and free, which was almost worse because it meant the threat was in his head, and you can't outrun what's inside your own skull. Frank knew people in New Hampshire, former colleagues from the Boston PD who'd retired to the quiet towns north of Concord, guys who did private security work and kept their ears close to the ground. He made calls from the Sunoco parking lot while I sat in the passenger seat analyzing the anonymous messages on my laptop. 3 messages now. I laid them side by side and looked at the metadata. The timestamps formed a pattern I hadn't noticed before. The first message arrived within 30 minutes of my suspension from Meridian. The second arrived the morning after Marcus confessed to me at the cafe. The third arrived the night Marcus disappeared. Each message was sent within a tight window following a significant event in my case. The sender wasn't operating on a schedule. They were operating on a trigger. They were watching events unfold and responding in near real time. This person had either direct access to Daniel's communications, active surveillance on me, or both. Not a distant tipster dropping breadcrumbs. Someone inside the machine watching the gears turn, whispering through the gaps. By noon, Frank had a lead. One of his contacts, a retired detective now doing PI work in the Lakes region, had spotted a car matching Marcus's description at a budget motel in Lincoln, a small town near the White Mountains, 3 hours north. We drove. I used the time to dig deeper into the anonymous messages, trying to crack the VPN layering, running the routing through tools I'd built during my work at Meridian. Whoever configured the anonymization knew what they were doing, but had made one small error. The third message used a slightly different encryption handshake than the first two, suggesting the sender had switched devices or locations in a hurry. The error was tiny, invisible to most analysis, but I wasn't most analysts. I flagged it and moved on. I'd crack it later. Right now, Marcus was the priority. We arrived at the Lincoln Motel at 3 in the afternoon, a place called the Timberline Lodge, though there was no timber and no lodge, just a long row of doors painted green against a backdrop of mountains turning orange and red with autumn. Frank checked the lot. Marcus's car was parked in front of room 14. We knocked. Silence. Knocked again. The curtain moved. A face appeared in the gap between the fabric and the window frame. Hollow eyes, 3 days of stubble, skin the color of old paper. Marcus opened the door. He looked like he'd been buried alive and had just finished digging himself out. But the backpack was there, sitting on the bed behind him. And inside it, visible through the half-open zipper, was a black hard drive case. Marcus talked fast, the way people do when they've been alone with fear for too long and finally have someone to pour it into. The night I'd given him the motel address in Nashua, he'd driven there as planned, checked in, slept badly. 12 hours later, his phone rang. Unknown number. A man's voice, calm, conversational, the kind of voice that doesn't need to raise itself because the words do the work. Mr. Webb, we know where you are. We know what you have. Return it and this ends quietly. Keep it, and we'll make sure you never work again. We'll also make sure the gambling debts become public, including the ones you owe to people who don't go through courts. Marcus panicked, threw his things in the car, ditched his phone at a rest stop in Manchester, bought a prepaid from a gas station, and drove north until the towns got small enough to disappear in. I know I should have called you, he said, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of vending machine coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I just couldn't think. All I could hear was that voice. Did you recognize it? No, but he knew exactly what was on the hard drive. He listed specific file names. Whoever called me had seen the contents. Which meant Daniel's people knew the hard drive existed, and knew at least some of what was on it. The clock was real. Friday wasn't arbitrary. It was the deadline Daniel had set for damage control. I took the hard drive and set up my laptop on the motel's small desk, disconnected from the internet, no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, air-gapped the way I'd been trained to handle potentially compromised data. Frank stood by the window watching the parking lot. Marcus sat on the bed chewing his thumbnail down to the skin. I plugged in the drive and opened it. The file structure was organized the way a meticulous criminal organizes evidence of his own crimes, by date, by project, by target. 18 months of emails between Daniel Moretti, Victor Hale, and multiple recipients using coded aliases. The language was corporate on the surface, but the content was espionage. Discussions about acquiring technical assets from 3 different defense contractors. Schedules for extraction windows when security protocols were weakest. Payments to insiders routed through cryptocurrency and offshore accounts in Cyprus and the Caymans. I found a folder labeled Meridian Active. Inside were technical schematics I recognized immediately because I'd designed them. The encryption architecture for Project Sentinel, the classified system I'd spent 3 years building for the Department of Defense. My work, copied, annotated, and packaged for sale. The buyer communications referenced a foreign intermediary whose digital signature pointed to a shell company with ties to a nation-state intelligence service. This wasn't corporate theft. This was selling classified American defense technology to a foreign government. My hands went still on the keyboard. The thing I was most proud of, the system I'd poured 3 years of my life into, the work that I believed was protecting people, had been stolen from under me and turned into merchandise. Deeper in the files, I found the folder I'd been hunting for. Subject line: Gatekeeper, Monthly Report. A series of status updates sent to Daniel from inside Meridian Defense. Technical details about project timelines, security protocols, personnel changes, budget allocations. The sender's alias was GK7. The reports were thorough, precise, written by someone who understood classified defense systems from the inside out. I cross-referenced the technical details in the emails with information only accessible to holders of Level 4 security clearance at Meridian. There were 6 people in the entire company with that clearance. I was one. The CEO and CTO rarely engaged with project-level details. The 2 division directors oversaw different programs. That left one person whose access, schedule, and technical vocabulary matched the GK7 reports line by line. Howard Langford, my supervisor, my mentor, the man who'd recommended me for the Project Sentinel team, the man who'd encouraged me to attend the charity gala where I met Daniel, the man who'd talked me out of leaving Meridian when 2 other companies tried to recruit me, saying, "Meridian needs you, Kayla. You're irreplaceable here." I pulled up the specific emails. The writing style was Howard's, the same cadence, the same tendency to use semicolons where other people used periods, the same habit of starting paragraphs with "regarding" and "per our discussion." One email dated 18 months ago read, "Asset is fully integrated. Access to Project Sentinel encryption architecture is complete. Recommend accelerating timeline. Asset's engagement to M is stabilizing her routine, making extraction predictable." Asset. That was me. Fully integrated meant I was in position. Engagement to M, Daniel Moretti, was keeping me stable and predictable, easier to steal from. Howard had written about me the way an engineer writes about a component in a system. No name, no humanity, just function. Every late-night pep talk, every promotion recommendation, every "you're the best engineer I've ever managed" was a calibration. He wasn't building my career. He was building a pipeline, and I was the pipe. I thought back further, and the memories reshuffled themselves like cards being dealt into a new hand. Howard suggested I attend the charity gala. "Good networking, Kayla. You deserve a night out." Howard encouraged me to accept Daniel's first dinner invitation. "He seems like a solid guy. Don't overthink it. You deserve to be happy." Howard recommended me for the exact project that made me valuable as a target. Every nudge, every smile, every moment of supposed mentorship was a man positioning an asset for extraction. Frank was watching my face. He'd been doing this work long enough to recognize the expression of someone discovering that the ground they've been standing on is hollow. "What did you find?" he asked. I turned the laptop toward him. He read the emails, leaned back, exhaled through his nose. "Your boss." "My mentor," I corrected. The person I trusted more than anyone at that company. He fed me to Daniel. Every step of the way, he fed me to him. Frank didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say it would be okay. He said, "Keep going. There's more on that drive and we're burning daylight." There was more. A separate folder deeper in the file structure labeled Legacy Operations. Older files. Archived emails from 4 years ago. The Natalie Chen operation. I opened them expecting to see Daniel and Victor Hale. They were there, but so was a name I was not prepared for. V. Bennett. My sister was CC'd on 12 emails related to the Natalie Chen operation. Not as a passive observer receiving courtesy copies. She authored 3 of them. One email, dated 4 years ago from Vanessa to Daniel, read, "NC is becoming suspicious. She's asking questions about data access and has started changing her passwords more frequently. I suggest we accelerate the separation protocol before she builds a case. I've already identified a replacement candidate at Meridian Defense, my sister, Kayla Bennett. She has higher clearance than NC and significantly easier to control due to family dynamics. She trusts me completely. I can facilitate the introduction whenever you're ready to proceed. I read it 3 times. The motel room was silent except for the hum of the baseboard heater and Marcus's shallow breathing from the bed. Vanessa didn't stumble into this. She didn't get swept up in Daniel's scheme and go along reluctantly. She identified me as the next target. She wrote the email. She used the words, easier to control. She wrote, she trusts me completely as a selling point, the way a real estate agent describes a property's best feature. My trust in my own sister was the asset she offered Daniel to secure her place in his operation. I closed the laptop very slowly. The click of the screen meeting the keyboard was the loudest sound in the room. I stood up and walked to the bathroom, closed the door, sat on the tile floor with my back against the tub, and then I cried. Not the way I cried at the gate when Daniel and Vanessa drove away. That was shock. This was something deeper, something that came from a place beneath memory, beneath logic, beneath the part of my brain that analyzes systems and finds patterns. This was the part that was still 8 years old, sharing a bedroom with her big sister, whispering across the gap between their beds, believing that the person on the other side of the dark was the safest person in the world. Vanessa sat at a desk and typed, "She trusts me completely," and sent it to a man who would spend 2 years dismantling me. She did it after watching him do the same thing to Natalie Chen. She knew what would happen. She'd seen the blueprint. And she volunteered her own sister as the building material. I stayed on that bathroom floor for 15 minutes. I let it move through me because I'd spent my whole life pushing things down, and I was done. I was done being the woman who held it together so everyone else could fall apart. After 15 minutes, I washed my face with cold water, looked at myself in the motel bathroom mirror under the fluorescent light that made everyone look half dead, and went back out. Frank was standing by the window. Marcus was exactly where I'd left him. Frank said gently, "You don't have to do the rest tonight." "She watched what happened to Natalie," I said. "She watched that woman's life get destroyed. Then she typed an email recommending me as the replacement. I have to finish this tonight, Frank, because if I stop now, I'm not sure I'll start again." I copied the entire hard drive onto 2 encrypted backup drives. One went to Frank for physical safekeeping. One I would deliver to Rachel Dominguez at the FBI in the morning. The original stayed with me. I called Rachel at 1 a.m. from the burner phone. She answered on the second ring. She hadn't been sleeping either. I gave her the summary. Howard Langford is gatekeeper. Vanessa was involved in the Natalie Chen operation 4 years ago and personally recommended me as the next target. The hard drive contains 18 months of espionage communications, financial records, and buyer contacts with enough detail to build a federal case against Daniel Moretti, Howard Langford, Victor Hale, and Vanessa Bennett. Rachel was quiet for a long time. "Kayla, this is enough. This is enough for arrest warrants, for all of them. But I need you to understand what happens next. When we move fast, and everything goes public. Your name, your family, your work. The media coverage will intensify before it gets better. My family chose their side when they cashed that check. I have nothing left to protect except the truth." "One more thing," Rachel said. "The anonymous messages you've been receiving, we've been trying to trace them on our end too. We're getting closer. Whoever's sending them is inside Moretti's organization and they want him to fall as badly as you do." "Or they want me to think that," Rachel almost laughed. "Fair point. Stay sharp, Ms. Bennett." I hung up and looked at the hard drive sitting on the motel desk. Everything I needed was on that device. Every lie, every scheme, every betrayal mapped out in cold corporate language. Howard's monthly reports, Vanessa's recruitment email, Daniel's buyer communications, the architecture of an operation that had consumed 2 women's lives and was reaching for a third. 2 days until Friday. 2 days until Daniel planned to disappear. 48 hours to make sure that when the walls came down, they buried everyone who deserved it. Starting with my sister. Daniel Moretti called me on Thursday evening, one day before the anonymous sender's Friday deadline, using a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'd been screening every call for weeks, letting unknown numbers go to voicemail, listening to the recordings with the volume low in case they contained threats I didn't want Megan to overhear. But something made me pick up. Maybe instinct. Maybe the part of me that knew this call was coming the way you know a storm is coming when the air changes pressure. Kayla. His voice was the same, warm, controlled, the voice that had told me I was extraordinary, that had whispered against my hair at night, that had proposed to me on one knee while a string quartet played, and I cried because I thought I'd finally been chosen. I'd like to meet with you. Just the two of us. No lawyers, no theatrics. I think we can resolve this situation like rational adults. Every cell in my body said no. But I called Rachel Dominguez before I called my instincts. Rachel said yes. She said it fast, which told me the FBI had been waiting for Daniel to make contact. "We'll wire you," she said. "Small device, undetectable. If he says anything incriminating, anything that references the operation, the women, the espionage, we can use it. This could accelerate the timeline significantly. You want me to go in there with a recording device and sit across from a man who's been surveilling my best friend and erasing women for a decade? I want you to go in there and let him talk. Men like Moretti can't resist explaining how smart they are. It's their weakness. They need the person they've beaten to know how thoroughly they've been beaten. Give him an audience and he'll give us evidence." I agreed because Rachel was right, and because I wanted to look Daniel in the eyes and hear him say what I already knew. Not for the case, for me. We met at a restaurant in Back Bay called Harrington's, the kind of place where the entrees don't list prices, and the lighting is designed to make powerful people look even more powerful. Private booths in the back, leather seats the color of dried blood, a sommelier who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He stood as I approached, extending his hand the way he'd done 100 times at galas and fundraisers and dinner parties where I stood beside him and smiled because that was my role, to stand beside him and smile. I didn't take his hand. He withdrew it without changing expression and gestured to the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I sat down. The recording device was taped beneath my collarbone under a scarf Megan had lent me, silk with a pattern of blue flowers. I could feel its weight like a second heartbeat. "What do you want, Daniel?" He smiled. The shark smile. The one I used to find charming because I didn't understand that charm is just manipulation wearing a dinner jacket. "Straight to business. I always liked that about you, Kayla. You never wasted time on pretense." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced an envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper. The same kind he used for the handwritten letters he'd sent me during the courtship, back when I thought handwritten letters meant someone loved you instead of meaning they'd studied your psychological profile and knew you valued old-fashioned gestures. He slid the envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper outlining a settlement offer. $3 million deposited into any account of my choosing. A furnished apartment in Miami, title transferred to my name, no strings. All pending allegations related to the Meridian data breach would be resolved favorably, meaning someone would make the investigation disappear. In exchange, I would sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement covering all interactions with Daniel, Vanessa, and any associated parties. I would leave Boston permanently. I would cease all contact with federal investigators. I would disappear. $3 million is generous, Daniel said, leaning back, wineglass in hand. More than generous given the circumstances. You could start over, new city, new career, a life without lawyers and courtrooms and headlines. Think about it, Kayla. What does fighting get you? More pain, more exposure, more of your personal life dragged through the press. Take the money, walk away, be smart. I looked at the paper and I thought about what $3 million could buy. A house with no one else's name on the mortgage. A decade of financial security. Distance from the family that sold me. A quiet life somewhere warm where no one knew my name or my story. It would be so easy. That was the design. Daniel had spent his career understanding what people wanted and offering it to them at the exact moment their resistance was lowest. He knew I was tired. He knew I was broke. He knew I was sleeping in my friend's guest room and eating cereal for dinner and checking my rearview mirror every time I drove. He was offering me an exit because he believed exhaustion was a form of consent. "You're smart, Kayla," he continued, reading my silence as calculation. "Smarter than Natalie was. Don't end up like her." There it was. Natalie's name in his mouth, spoken casually, like a cautionary tale, like a footnote in a business report. Don't end up like her. The woman whose life he dismantled and filed under neutralized. He said her name the way you mention a discontinued product line, something that used to be useful and wasn't anymore. The recording device pressed against my collarbone like a promise. "How many women, Daniel?" I asked. My voice was level, conversational. "How many before Natalie? How many between Natalie and me?" His smile didn't waver, but it changed texture. The warmth drained out, and what was left was something harder, something closer to the real face beneath all the tailoring and the wine and the handwritten letters. "Enough to know how this ends," he said. "You can't fight this. You don't have the resources. You don't have the connections. You don't have the infrastructure. I've been doing this for a very long time, and every woman who's tried to stand up has ended up exactly where Natalie ended up. Alone, broke, forgotten." Is that a threat? It's a pattern. Patterns don't lie. You of all people should know that. I stood up, picked up the envelope, held it for a moment so the recording could capture the paper rustling. Then I tore it in half and set the pieces on the table between his wine glass and his bread plate. "I'm not Natalie," I said. "And I'm not signing anything. You can take your $3 million and your Miami apartment and your NDA and you can choke on them." Daniel's smile vanished. For 1 second, maybe less, I saw something behind his eyes that he'd kept locked away for the entire performance. Rage. Pure, concentrated. The rage of a man who has never been told no by someone he considered beneath him. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask, but I'd seen it, and the device on my chest had heard everything. I walked out of the restaurant and didn't look back. Rachel was in a surveillance van parked on Boylston Street 2 blocks away. I climbed in through the side door and handed over the scarf with the device still attached. Rachel played the recording back through a speaker. When Daniel's voice said, "Enough to know how this ends, and every woman who's tried to stand up has ended up exactly where Natalie ended up," Rachel paused the playback and looked at me. He referenced Natalie Chen by pattern, if not by name. He described a repeated method, and he implicitly threatened you with the same outcome. This isn't a confession, but it's close. Combined with the hard drive evidence and Marcus's testimony, it paints a picture that no jury will misread. I nodded. I felt hollow. Not defeated, just emptied, the way a room feels after you've moved all the furniture out and can finally hear the echo. What happens now? We're preparing the warrants. The hard drive gave us what we needed for Howard Langford and the espionage charges. The recording strengthens the case against Daniel personally. We're moving as fast as the system allows. She paused. But there's something you should know. Daniel just retained a new legal team, a heavy-hitting firm out of New York that specializes in defamation and civil litigation. They're preparing to file a lawsuit. Against me. Filed by Vanessa. But the legal strategy and funding is Daniel's. The suit will allege defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and harassment. It's designed to drain your resources and discredit you publicly before we can bring the federal charges. That night, Vanessa called me. It was the first time I'd heard her voice directly since the day at the gate. I was sitting on Megan's couch with a bowl of soup going cold on the coffee table, and my laptop open to a page I wasn't reading. Her name didn't appear on the caller ID, just a number. But I knew it was her the moment I heard breathing on the other end, the particular rhythm of someone who has something to say and no idea how to begin. Kayla. She said my name like she was testing whether it still worked in her mouth. What do you want, Vanessa? I need you to listen to me. Take the money. Whatever Daniel offered you, take it and leave Boston. You don't understand how dangerous he is. I almost laughed. I don't understand? Vanessa, I've spent the last 3 weeks understanding exactly how dangerous he is while you helped him do it. I know what you think of me. I know what you found. But Kayla, there are things about Daniel and me that you don't know. Things that aren't in any email. Her voice was different. Not the cool, certain Vanessa from the Cadillac. Not the serene Vanessa drinking water in our mother's kitchen. This Vanessa sounded thin, the way a wire sounds right before it snaps. I'm also trapped. I've been trapped for years. He has things on me that would destroy what's left of my life. I did what he told me to do because the alternative was worse. The alternative to selling your sister? Silence. Then, barely a whisper. Yes. I closed my eyes. Some part of me, some stupid, stubborn 8-year-old part that still remembered sharing a bedroom and whispering across the dark, wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that Vanessa was a victim too, that she'd been manipulated the same way I had, that somewhere inside the woman who typed, "She trusts me completely," there was still the sister who braided my hair before school and told me I was brave. But I couldn't afford that part of me right now. That part had cost me everything. You filed a lawsuit against me, Vanessa. You're suing me for defamation while I'm trying to prove that your boyfriend ran a federal espionage operation. Daniel's lawyers drew it up. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. You just kept making the wrong one. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from the effort of holding a door shut that part of me wanted desperately to open. Friday morning, the day the anonymous sender warned that Daniel would try to leave the country. I delivered the second encrypted backup of the hard drive to Rachel Dominguez at the FBI field office at 7 a.m. She took it with both hands like it was made of glass. My team has been analyzing the first copy since you gave it to Frank 2 days ago, she said. I need to walk you through what we've found. We sat in the same windowless conference room where I'd first told her my story. Rachel opened a laptop and projected the file structure onto the wall. The hard drive contains 18 months of communications confirming economic espionage, conspiracy, and theft of classified defense technology. Daniel Moretti coordinated operations targeting at least 3 defense contractors, including Meridian Defense and Harmon Dynamics in Virginia, where Natalie Chen worked. He used romantic relationships with women who held security clearances to gain access to classified systems, then framed them for the breaches when they were no longer useful. She clicked through the files. The buyer communications reference a foreign intermediary we've traced to an entity with documented ties to a foreign intelligence service. This elevates the charges from corporate espionage to national security. Daniel Moretti wasn't just stealing technology, he was selling American defense secrets. Rachel clicked to a new screen. Howard Langford's communications as gatekeeper are extensive. Monthly reports, technical schematics, personnel files. He's been operating inside Meridian for at least 3 years, possibly longer. His compensation was routed through cryptocurrency to an offshore account in Cyprus. Total payments we've identified so far, approximately $700,000. She turned to me. And then there's your sister. The next screen showed Vanessa's emails, the ones I'd already read. NC is becoming suspicious. I've identified a replacement candidate. She trusts me completely. Vanessa Bennett participated knowingly in the Natalie Chen operation 4 years ago and actively recruited you as the replacement target. She received direct payments from Moretti Holdings, totaling approximately $350,000 over the past 4 years, in addition to the $500,000 invested in her company through the foundation. Rachel closed the laptop. We have enough for arrest warrants: Daniel Moretti, Howard Langford, Victor Hale, and Vanessa Bennett. My team is drafting the warrant applications today. A federal judge is standing by to review them. What about the Friday deadline? I asked. The anonymous messages said Daniel is planning to leave the country. Rachel nodded. We've been monitoring his travel arrangements. He has a private jet reserved at Hanscom Field for tomorrow evening, filed a flight plan to London with a connecting charter to Zurich. If he reaches Switzerland, extradition becomes significantly more complicated. Can you stop him? We've requested a travel hold through the federal court. It should be in place by end of business today. His passport will be flagged, but until the warrants are signed and executed, he's technically still a free man. We're moving fast, but the legal process has its own speed. What do you need from me? Right now, I need you to prepare for what happens when the warrants are executed. If Daniel's lawyers are filing a civil suit through Vanessa, that proceeding will likely be underway when we move. It's going to be very public and very ugly. You need a lawyer for the civil case. I can't afford a lawyer. I know, but I have a name, Teresa Kwong, civil rights attorney. She's handled cases involving corporate retaliation and abuse of legal process. She sometimes takes pro bono cases that align with her advocacy work. I've already made a call. She's expecting to hear from you. I called Teresa Kwong from the FBI parking lot. She answered on the first ring, which told me Rachel hadn't just made a call. She'd made a case. Teresa's voice was calm and precise, the kind of calm that comes from years of walking into courtrooms where the other side had more money, more lawyers, and more power, and winning anyway. Ms. Bennett, Agent Dominguez briefed me on your situation. I've reviewed the publicly available information and I'd like to help. Pro bono, no strings. Why? Because I've seen this pattern before, powerful men using civil litigation to silence the women they've harmed. Defamation suits, restraining orders, harassment claims. They weaponize the legal system and most victims can't afford to fight back, so the suits succeed by default. I don't let that happen when I can help it. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop in Chinatown. Teresa was in her 40s, small, with sharp eyes behind wire-framed glasses, and a handshake that could crack a walnut. She'd reviewed the defamation complaint Vanessa's lawyers had filed. It's boilerplate intimidation, Teresa said, flipping through the document. They're alleging that you made defamatory statements about Vanessa and Daniel to third parties, including federal investigators. They're claiming emotional distress. They want a restraining order and $2 million in damages. Can they win? Not if we have the evidence you say we have. A defamation claim requires the plaintiff to prove that the statements were false. If what you told the FBI is true, and the hard drive confirms it, then truth is an absolute defense. But here's the thing, Kayla. They don't need to win. They just need to get you into a courtroom, tie you up in depositions and motions and hearings, drain your energy, and make you look like the aggressor while Vanessa plays the victim. The lawsuit isn't about justice. It's a performance. So what do we do? Teresa smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile a chess player makes when they see the board shifting in their favor. We let them perform. We let Vanessa take the stand and tell the court how her little sister has been harassing her and making false accusations. We let Victor Hale's legal team present their case, and then we present ours. Marcus Webb gave his formal testimony to the FBI that afternoon. Rachel arranged for him to come to the field office under escort from the New Hampshire safe location. I wasn't present for the testimony itself, but Rachel briefed me afterward. Marcus confirmed everything, the fabricated access logs. Vanessa's recruitment of him at the company happy hour. Daniel's pressure and threats tied to the gambling debt. The hard drive he copied from Daniel's office when he realized the operation was larger than he'd been told. He also provided a detail he'd been too scared to mention before. 6 months ago, Howard Langford had called Marcus into his office, closed the door, and told him directly that if anyone ever asked questions about the data logs, Marcus was to say that Kayla Bennett had provided him with her login credentials voluntarily. Langford told me to lie under oath if it came to that, Marcus told Rachel. He said Daniel would make sure I was protected. He said it like he was discussing a budget report. No emotion, no hesitation, just instructions. Rachel added Marcus's testimony to the warrant applications and submitted the complete package to the federal judge. The The warrants covered Daniel Moretti, Howard Langford, Victor Hale, and Vanessa Bennett. Charges included economic espionage, conspiracy to commit theft of classified defense technology, bribery of a federal contractor employee, wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The judge reviewed the applications that evening. At 9:47 that night, Rachel called me. "Warrants are signed, all 4. We execute Monday morning. Daniel's travel hold is active. His passport was flagged 2 hours ago. He's not going anywhere." I sat on the edge of Megan's guest bed and pressed the phone against my ear and listened to Rachel outline the operational plan. FBI teams would simultaneously arrest Daniel at his penthouse in Back Bay, Howard at the Meridian Defense Offices, and Victor Hale at his law firm. Vanessa would be picked up separately and offered the chance to cooperate. "The civil hearing on Vanessa's defamation suit is scheduled for Monday afternoon," Rachel said. "We're timing the arrests to coincide. If everything goes according to plan, Daniel will be in federal custody before Vanessa's lawyers finish their opening statement." I hung up and sat in the dark room for a long time. Monday. 3 days away. After weeks of running, digging, hiding, crying on motel bathroom floors and eating cereal at midnight and watching my life collapse one pillar at a time, the machinery of justice was finally turning. Not because the system worked on its own. It didn't. The system had failed Natalie Chen completely 4 years ago. The system had suspended me from my job, let a corrupt judge's friend file a restraining order, allowed a media hit piece to paint me as unstable. The system hadn't saved me. I'd crawled inside it and rewired it from the inside, the way I'd rewired encryption systems my entire career. I found the vulnerabilities. I traced the connections. I built the case the system needed but couldn't build for itself. My burner phone buzzed. One last anonymous message. Same number, short this time, just 4 words. "Monday, be in court." I stared at the screen. The anonymous sender knew about the warrants. They knew about the timing. They knew I'd be in the courtroom when it happened. Whoever this person was, they were close enough to the FBI's operational planning to know the schedule, or close enough to Daniel to know when the walls were about to close. Either way, they wanted me there. They wanted me to see it happen. I typed back, "I will be." This time 3 dots appeared and a reply came through. "Good, he never expected you to fight, none of them did." Then the number went dark for the last time. I turned off the phone and lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. In 3 days I would walk into a courtroom and watch the people who tried to erase me discover that I was still here, that I had always been here, that the woman they dismissed as a convenient target, the reliable sister, the quiet engineer, the easy mark, had taken everything they'd thrown at her and built a weapon out of the wreckage. I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. The Suffolk County Courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper, and the particular brand of anxiety that seeps into the walls of any building where people come to have their lives rearranged by strangers in robes. I arrived at 8:15 on Monday morning wearing a navy blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop in Cambridge the day before, because every piece of professional clothing I owned was either locked in an apartment I could no longer access, or hanging in a closet that had been emptied by my sister's hands. Teresa Kwong met me in the lobby. She was carrying a single leather briefcase that looked like it had survived more courtrooms than most lawyers would see in a lifetime. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I'm about to walk into a room full of people who want to destroy me, and the only thing standing between me and them is the truth and a folder full of evidence." Teresa adjusted her glasses. "That's exactly right. And in my experience, that's usually enough." We took the elevator to the 4th floor. Courtroom 412, Judge Raymond Morrison presiding. The hallway outside was already crowded. I recognized Victor Hale immediately. He stood near the courtroom door in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Teresa's entire wardrobe, talking in low tones with 2 junior attorneys who nodded at everything he said like they were being paid by the nod. Behind him, seated on a wooden bench against the wall, were my parents. My mother saw me first. Diane Bennett was wearing the blue dress she reserved for church and funerals, which told me she understood that today was one or the other. Her eyes found mine across the hallway, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to stand, to come toward me, to say something that would bridge the distance between us. Then my father put his hand on her knee, a small, firm gesture that said, "Stay." And she looked away. Richard Bennett stared straight ahead, jaw set, arms crossed. He was there for Vanessa. He'd chosen his side and he was sitting in it. I walked past them without stopping. Teresa held the courtroom door open for me and we entered together. The room was large, high-ceilinged, with rows of gallery seating that were already half full. Media was present. I recognized 2 reporters from the Globe and a woman with a camera bag from Channel 5. The defamation suit Vanessa had filed had drawn attention because it involved a billionaire's name, a sister's feud, and the word espionage in the public filings. It was the kind of story that sold clicks, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to my humiliation. Vanessa was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked perfect, hair smoothed into a low chignon, cream blouse, pearl stud earrings, not my grandmother's pearls. She must have been advised to leave those at home. Minimal makeup that somehow made her look more fragile, more sympathetic, more like a woman who had been wronged by a troubled sister rather than a woman who had written, "She trusts me completely," in an email recommending that sister for exploitation. Beside her sat 2 attorneys from the New York firm Daniel had retained. They were sleek and silent, the kind of lawyers who bill by the breath. And behind her, in the first row of the gallery, sat Daniel Moretti. He wore a dark suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that was calculated to look casual rather than careless. His posture said he owned the room. His presence said that even though the lawsuit was filed in Vanessa's name, everyone knew whose money was paying for it and whose interests it served. He was here to watch me lose, to sit in the gallery and observe the final phase of my erasure with the same quiet satisfaction he'd shown when I watched him eat pot roast with my family through the dining room window. I sat down at the defendant's table. Teresa arranged her files with the calm efficiency of a surgeon laying out instruments. "Remember," she said without looking up, "they're going to try to make you emotional. They want tears or anger, something the gallery can photograph and the reporters can describe. Don't give them either. Be clear, be factual, and when it's our turn, let me drive." Judge Morrison entered. Late 50s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the bearing of a man who had been doing this long enough to be tired of theatrics but not long enough to be cynical about justice. He called the case. Vanessa's lead attorney, a woman named Christine Dell with hair the color of polished copper and a voice that could cut glass, stood and delivered her opening. She painted a portrait of Vanessa as a devoted sister who had watched helplessly as Kayla spiraled after the end of a relationship, making increasingly wild accusations against the man who had broken her heart and the sister who happened to be in his life. Ms. Kayla Bennett has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, defamation, and emotional manipulation, Dell said, her voice ringing in the courtroom. She has made false statements to federal investigators. She has contacted witnesses and attempted to coach their testimony. She has made baseless accusations of criminal conduct against her own sister, damaging Ms. Vanessa Bennett's personal and professional reputation. We are here today to seek a protective order and compensatory damages for the harm Ms. Kayla Bennett has inflicted. It was a masterpiece of inversion. Every true thing I had done, contacting the FBI, gathering evidence, finding witnesses, was reframed as harassment. Every lie they had told was presented as the truth I was trying to destroy. Teresa's opening was shorter. She stood, placed one hand on the table, and spoke directly to Judge Morrison without notes. "Your Honor, my client is a cybersecurity engineer who was framed for a federal crime by her ex-fiancé and her own sister. Every action she has taken since being wrongfully suspended from her position has been in pursuit of truth and in cooperation with federal law enforcement. The plaintiff's claims are not only without merit, they are part of a documented pattern of using civil litigation to silence victims of corporate espionage. We intend to prove this." Morrison's expression didn't change, but I saw his eyes flick briefly toward Daniel in the gallery. A judge who'd been on the bench for decades could smell money influencing a courtroom the way a mechanic can smell a leaking engine. Victor Hale's team called me to the stand first. It was Christine Dell who conducted the examination, and she was good, surgically good. She walked me through a timeline of events that, stripped of context, made me sound exactly the way Daniel's media campaign had painted me. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that since the end of your engagement you've hired a private investigator to follow your former fiancé? I hired a private investigator to uncover evidence of fraud and espionage. You've traveled to another state to contact a woman your fiancé previously dated? I contacted Natalie Chen because she was a victim of the same operation that targeted me. You've met secretly with a former colleague and obtained materials that may include proprietary corporate data? I received a hard drive containing evidence of classified defense technology being stolen and sold to foreign intermediaries. Dell smiled. Not at me. At the gallery. So you admit to obtaining potentially classified materials outside of any authorized process. I admitted those materials to the FBI, which is the authorized process. Dell changed tactics. She picked up a printed copy of the Boston Globe article. Ms. Bennett, are you currently taking prescription medication for anxiety? I was prescribed medication, yes. The bottles were stolen from my home. Stolen? By whom? By someone acting on behalf of Daniel Moretti, who then provided my prescription information to the press. Do you have proof of that? I have proof that my home was entered and items were removed without my consent during a period when Daniel Moretti and Vanessa Bennett had access to my residence. That's not what I asked. Do you have proof that Daniel Moretti personally directed the theft of your medication? I looked at Dell. She was good. She was trying to isolate each piece of my story and make it sound paranoid when removed from the chain. One crazy-sounding claim at a time, until the jury of public opinion saw a pattern of instability instead of a pattern of persecution. No single piece of evidence proves everything on its own, I said. But the full body of evidence, which is currently in the possession of the FBI, demonstrates a coordinated campaign to frame me, discredit me, and destroy my career. Teresa stood for the cross. She called Natalie Chen to the stand. The courtroom shifted. People leaned forward. Even Morrison tilted his head slightly, the way people do when the story they thought they were hearing changes key. Natalie walked to the witness box in a dark suit she'd bought for the occasion, her hand steady, her voice clear. She'd spent 4 years being the woman nobody believed. Today, for the first time, someone was asking her to tell her story under oath. Dr. Chen, Teresa said, will you please describe your relationship with a man you knew as David Moran? Natalie described it. The courtship, the charm, the proposals, the access to her work, the framing. The identical access logs showing her credentials used during off hours from locations she'd never been. The firing, the destroyed career, the apartment break-in, the note on her kitchen counter. Victor Hale rose to object 3 times. Morrison overruled him 3 times, each time with less patience. When Natalie described the email from Hale's own firm that referred to her as subject neutralized, the courtroom went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight and texture and fills a room like water rising. Dell tried to recover. She challenged Natalie's credibility, her memory, her motives. Natalie answered every question with the flat precision of a woman who had rehearsed these answers in her own head every night for 4 years, not for a courtroom but for the imaginary audience of people who might someday believe her. Dr. Chen, isn't it possible that you're simply a disgruntled former employee seeking to blame someone else for your own professional failures? Teresa objected. Morrison sustained it immediately. Counsel, you will treat this witness with respect. Dell sat down. Morrison looked at Teresa. Do you have additional witnesses? Teresa stood. Your Honor, we had planned to call 1 additional witness. However, I believe the court may want to accommodate a new development. She looked toward the back of the courtroom. I followed her gaze. and the back door of courtroom 412 opened. Rachel Dominguez walked in, flanked by 4 federal agents in dark suits. They moved with the controlled urgency of people who have rehearsed a moment and are now executing it with the precision of a military operation. Rachel carried a folder in her left hand. Her badge was visible on her belt. She walked down the center aisle and stopped halfway between the gallery and the bench. "Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Rachel Dominguez, FBI Counterintelligence Division. I apologize for the interruption. We have federal arrest warrants for Daniel Moretti, present in this courtroom, on charges of economic espionage, conspiracy to commit theft of classified defense technology, bribery of a federal contractor employee, money laundering, and wire fraud." The room didn't erupt. It cracked, like a pane of glass hit by a stone, the fracture spreading outward in every direction at once. Victor Hale was on his feet, his face the color of ash. "This is outrageous. You cannot arrest a man in the middle of a civil proceeding. This is a violation of—" Rachel did not look at him. She nodded to 2 of the agents who walked toward Daniel. He stood slowly, the way a man stands when he refuses to believe the ground is moving beneath him. He adjusted his cuffs. He buttoned his jacket. The last gestures of a man who had controlled every room he'd ever entered, performed now in a room he had just lost. The agents reached him. One said, "Mr. Moretti, please turn around." Daniel turned. The handcuffs clicked. The sound was small and metallic and final. He did not look at Vanessa, not once. He walked past her table, past the woman he'd used as a recruiter and a weapon and a shield, and he did not turn his head a single degree in her direction. He looked at me, held my gaze for 2 seconds. 3. Then one of the agents put a hand on his shoulder and guided him toward the side exit, and Daniel Moretti walked out of the courtroom and out of my life. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table and did not move. Her lawyers were already packing their briefcases. One of them leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and she shook her head, slowly, like a woman hearing a diagnosis she'd been expecting but hadn't truly believed. Her legal team left without speaking to her. They walked out through the gallery doors and disappeared into the hallway, and Vanessa sat alone at a table designed for 3, her hands flat on the wood surface, staring at the place where Daniel had been sitting 30 seconds ago. Rachel announced that additional arrest warrants were being executed simultaneously. Howard Langford was being taken into custody at Meridian Defense Headquarters. A search warrant was being executed at Moretti Holdings in the financial district. Victor Hale was to appear before a federal grand jury within 48 hours. Hale sat down in his chair like someone had cut his strings. The man who had spent his career making problems vanish was watching himself become the problem. Judge Morrison, to his credit, recovered quickly. He declared the civil case suspended indefinitely pending the resolution of federal proceedings. The defamation suit was effectively dead. Vanessa's claim that I had harassed and defamed her had just been overtaken by federal arrest warrants, confirming that everything I'd said was true. Teresa leaned over and whispered, "The civil case is over, Kayla." I shook my head. "The case is over, but this isn't done." Rachel approached Vanessa at the plaintiff's table. Her voice was low, professional, almost gentle. "Ms. Bennett, I need you to come with me. We have questions. You're not under arrest at this time, but I strongly recommend full cooperation." Vanessa looked up. Her eyes found mine across the courtroom. For the first time since the Cadillac, she did not look certain. She did not look cold. She did not look like the woman who drank water in our mother's kitchen while casually informing me that I should be grateful for a lifetime of servitude. She looked like someone standing on a bridge and realizing, too late, that the structure beneath her feet was never solid. She stood, smoothed her skirt, muscle memory. The performance of composure by a body that had been performing it for so long it didn't know how to stop. She walked toward the side exit where Rachel waited. As she passed my table, she stopped. 3 feet between us. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't think it would go this far. I looked at my sister, the woman who had braided my hair before school, the woman who had typed, "She trusts me completely," and sent it to a man who would spend 2 years taking me apart. You recommended me as a target, I said. You typed the email. You used the words, "She trusts me completely." You knew exactly how far it would go. Vanessa's eyes filled. She did not speak. Rachel took her arm, gently, and led her through the side door. It closed behind them with a mechanical click that sounded like the last page of something being turned. The courtroom emptied slowly around me. Media rushed for the exits, phones already out, filing stories before they reached the hallway. Victor Hale's junior attorneys scattered like pigeons. Teresa packed her briefcase with the unhurried precision of a woman who had just won a fight she'd been preparing for since the first phone call. And in the gallery, 2 rows from the back, my parents sat perfectly still. My father's arms had uncrossed. They hung at his sides like they'd forgotten their purpose. My mother was staring at the side door through which Vanessa had been led away, her mouth slightly open, her eyes seeing something that was not in the room. They looked like people watching their house burn from across the street, close enough to feel the heat, but too far away to save anything inside. I gathered my things and walked past them. My mother's hand twitched, reaching toward the aisle as I passed, but she didn't speak, and I didn't stop. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and breathed. The marble was cool against my back. Teresa found me there. "The FBI wants to bring you in for a debrief. But first, there's something you should know. Rachel arranged for you to observe Vanessa's interrogation through a one-way mirror. She thinks you should hear what your sister has to say." "When?" "Now." The FBI field office was 20 minutes from the courthouse. Rachel met us at the entrance and led us through security, down the fluorescent hallway I was beginning to know by heart, past the windowless conference room where I'd first laid out my evidence, to a door marked Observation. Inside was a narrow room with a single window of one-way glass, 2 chairs, and a speaker mounted on the wall that transmitted sound from the interrogation room on the other side. Frank DeLuca was already there. He nodded at me once and said nothing. Through the glass, Vanessa sat at a metal table under fluorescent lights that turned her skin the color of old wax. Rachel sat across from her. A second agent stood by the door. Rachel laid out the charges: conspiracy to commit economic espionage, accessory to theft of classified defense technology, wire fraud, financial fraud, if convicted on all counts, up to 25 years in federal prison. "You're 35, Rachel said. You would be 60 when you got out." Vanessa stared at the table. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup of water that she hadn't touched. Rachel offered the alternative: full cooperation, testimony against Daniel Moretti, complete documentation of her involvement and knowledge, a reduced charge, conspiracy and fraud, 8 to 12 years with the possibility of parole after 6. And then Vanessa started talking. Once she started, she did not stop. Daniel approached her 5 years ago. She was already working at Moretti Capital, a low-level financial assistant handling investor reports and filing paperwork. He noticed her the way predators notice vulnerability, not with malice at first, but with recognition. He learned about her family, the dynamic with Kayla, the favoritism that had left Vanessa with everything and nothing at the same time, every advantage, and none of the self-sufficiency that comes from earning something on your own. He learned about the debt she'd accumulated through failed business ventures she hid from her parents, the loans she'd defaulted on, the credit cards maxed out on a lifestyle she couldn't sustain but couldn't surrender, because surrender meant admitting that the golden child was hollow. He offered to clear the debt. Then he offered something more dangerous: a role. "He told me I was special," Vanessa said, her voice stripped of every performance I'd ever heard from her. "He said I was the smart one in the family, that Kayla was talented but naive, that together he and I could build something real. He made me feel like I mattered, not because of what I could give him, but because of who I was." I stood behind the glass and listened to my sister describe being seduced by the same methodology Daniel had used on me. Different words, same architecture. He found the hollow place inside her and poured himself into it until she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. Rachel pushed. When did it become criminal? Gradually. He asked me to provide background on Kayla, work habits, personality, vulnerabilities, relationship history. I rationalized it. I told myself he genuinely liked her. That maybe they'd be happy. Maybe it would work out and I'd have been part of something good. But you knew about Natalie Chen. Vanessa went still. The paper cup in her hands compressed slightly. Yes. You were involved in the operation against Dr. Chen 4 years ago. Yes. You witnessed the destruction of her career, her reputation, and her personal life using the same methods that were later applied to your sister. Yes. And you still recommended Kayla as the replacement target. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. Yes. Rachel leaned forward. Tell me about the email. The one where you wrote, "She trusts me completely." Vanessa's hands trembled. Water sloshed against the sides of the paper cup. I wrote that because it was true. Kayla trusted me more than anyone in the world. She'd given up things for me that I never asked for and never deserved. The scholarship, the loans, the money. She gave and never asked what I was doing with any of it. She paused. I wrote those words because Daniel told me that Kayla's trust in me was the most valuable asset I could offer. Without it, I was just another assistant, another replaceable person in his orbit. With it, I was essential. I was the key to his next operation. And being essential to Daniel Moretti was the first time in my life I felt like I was enough. I pressed my fingers against the glass. It was cold. On the other side, my sister was describing the moment she decided to trade me for the feeling of being important. Not out of hatred, not out of cruelty, out of a desperation so deep and so old that it predated Daniel, predated the debt, predated everything except the two of us in a childhood bedroom where she was told she was special, and I was told to wait my turn. She betrayed me because my trust was the only currency she had, and she spent it because spending it made her feel rich. Behind me, Frank shifted in his chair. Teresa stood motionless by the wall. I said quietly, to no one in particular, she hated me for being stronger than her. But she never understood that I was only strong because I had to be, because no one in that family ever protected me. I built my own walls because she and my parents never gave me a door. That evening, after the debrief, after Teresa filed a motion to dismiss the defamation suit, after Rachel confirmed that Daniel was in federal holding, and Howard Langford had been arrested at his desk at Meridian with his coffee still warm, I drove back to Megan's apartment. My phone had 17 missed calls, 14 from media. 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, 1 from my father. I sat in the car and listened to his voicemail. Richard Bennett's voice was a sound I had known my entire life, the deep baritone that called us down for dinner, that read the newspaper aloud on Sunday mornings, that told me to think about the family every time I considered thinking about myself. But the voice on the recording was different. It was cracked, not angry, not commanding, broken. Kayla, it's Dad. We saw what happened in court. It's all over the news. Your mother and I, we need to talk. We need to see you. Please call us back, Kayla, please. He said, please. I replayed it to make sure I'd heard correctly. Richard Bennett said please to me. In 32 years, through every sacrifice, every yielded scholarship, every co-signed loan, every holiday where I sat at the kids' table so Vanessa's friends could have my chair, my father had never once used that word with me. He was using it now because the cameras were rolling and the FBI had walked into a courtroom and the world had just seen what the Bennett family really was. Whether it was remorse or reputation management, I couldn't tell. And I realized, sitting in that car with his voice still echoing from the speaker, that I didn't care which one it was. Not today. I did not call back. I drove past Newton on my way home. I didn't plan to. The route from the FBI office to Megan's apartment didn't go through Newton, but my hands turned the wheel without consulting my brain, and suddenly I was on Walnut Street, and my parents' house was ahead on the right. The lights were on, every window. The American flag hung limp on the porch in the still November air. Through the living room window I could see movement. my mother pacing, my father in his armchair with his head in his hands, a posture I had never seen him assume in my life. Richard Bennett did not put his head in his hands. Richard Bennett sat upright and spoke with authority and told other people to get control of themselves. The man in that window was someone I didn't recognize. The light turned green. I drove on. My phone rang again. Richard. I let it ring 5 times. Then I answered. Kayla, thank God. Honey, we need to... Dad. My voice was steady, not angry, not cold. Just clear, the way a bell is clear, the way water is clear when it's been filtered through stone. You had 32 years to talk to me. You had 2 years to warn me about Daniel. You had 6 months to tell me you took his money. You chose silence every single time because silence was easy and I was convenient. Now it's my turn to choose silence. When I'm ready, I'll call you. Until then, don't. I hung up. I did not turn the phone off. I just set it on the passenger seat and let it be silent on its own terms. Megan was on the couch when I got home, still in her scrubs, her shoes kicked off by the door. The apartment smelled like chamomile tea and the lavender candle she lit when she was stressed. She looked up when I walked in, and I could see that she'd been watching the news, because her eyes had the particular fullness they get when she's trying not to cry on someone else's behalf. I saw it, she said. All of it. I dropped my bag by the door and sat next to her. She poured me a mug of tea from the pot on the coffee table. We sat together in the quiet apartment while the city hummed outside the windows and the last of the autumn light faded behind the Boston skyline. Are you okay? Megan asked. I thought about the question. I mean, really thought about it, not the reflexive I'm fine I'd been dispensing like aspirin my entire life, not the deflection that protected other people from worrying about me, not the performance of stability that had been my role in every relationship I'd ever had. I thought about what okay actually meant and whether I was anywhere near it. For the first time in my life, I said, I don't need someone else to tell me I'm okay in order to believe it. Megan didn't respond with words. She reached over and took my hand. We sat like that on the couch in her small apartment in Brookline, while the city settled into night outside the windows. 2 women holding hands in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled because it's already full. Somewhere downtown, Daniel Moretti was in a holding cell. Howard Langford was calling lawyers who would not be able to help him. Victor Hale was staring at a grand jury summons. Vanessa was in a room answering questions she should have answered 5 years ago. And my father was sitting in his armchair in Newton with his head in his hands, learning for the first time what it felt like to call someone and have them choose not to answer. I had spent 32 years building myself into whatever everyone else needed me to be. The reliable one, the quiet one, the one who sacrificed and adjusted and yielded and bent. That woman still lived inside me. She probably always would. But tonight, sitting on a second-hand couch with the only person who had ever chosen me without conditions, I felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter than both. It was the feeling of finally setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. 6 months later, I sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse in Boston and watched the machinery of justice do what it was built to do. I was not required to be there. No subpoena, no legal obligation. I chose to come because I needed to see it end in the same room where it had begun to unravel, because some things you carry in your body until you watch them be set down in front of witnesses, and because I had earned the right to sit in that room and breathe freely while the people who tried to erase me learned the weight of what they'd done. I wore a navy blazer I'd bought at a store in the Back Bay the week before, paid for with my own money, chosen by my own hand, in a size I didn't have to justify to anyone. It was a small thing. But after a year of wearing borrowed clothes and sleeping in borrowed rooms and eating meals I hadn't chosen because choosing felt like a luxury I no longer deserved, putting on a jacket I'd picked for myself felt like planting a flag on reclaimed ground. Daniel Moretti was sentenced first. He stood in an orange jumpsuit with his wrists cuffed in front of him, and the distance between that image and the man in the charcoal suit who had proposed to me at the Liberty Hotel was so vast that my brain kept trying to reconcile the two and failing. The judge read the charges: economic espionage, conspiracy to commit theft of classified defense technology, bribery of a federal contractor employee, wire fraud, money laundering. Daniel's legal team had fought for 18 months. Pretrial motions, procedural challenges, appeals to suppress evidence, attempts to discredit witnesses. None of it worked. The hard drive was too thorough. Marcus's testimony was too specific. Howard's confession, extracted piece by piece over months of interrogation, filled in the gaps the digital evidence left behind. And Vanessa's cooperation, reluctant and painful and incomplete as it was, provided the human narrative that made the data tell a story a jury could understand. Sentence: 20 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 12. Daniel did not react when the number was read. His face remained the mask it had always been, the smooth, controlled surface that concealed whatever engine ran beneath it. But as the judge finished speaking, Daniel turned his head and scanned the gallery. His eyes found me. He held my gaze for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds I saw exactly what I expected to see. Nothing. No remorse. No rage. No recognition that I was a person who had loved him and been destroyed by him and survived. He looked at me the way he had always looked at me, as a component that had malfunctioned, an asset that had failed to perform as designed. I held his gaze without blinking. I did not look away first. He did. Howard Langford was sentenced next. He had cooperated partially, confirmed his role as gatekeeper, provided details about the data extraction methods and the offshore payment structure. But his cooperation was strategic rather than complete. He withheld information about other operations Daniel had run through other companies, other women, other insiders. The FBI knew there were more, but Howard bargained with what he gave and held back what he thought might buy him leverage later. It didn't. The judge noted his selective honesty with undisguised displeasure. Sentence: 10 years. Howard stood with his shoulders caved inward, staring at the table in front of him, a man who had spent 30 years building a career in defense technology and sold it for cryptocurrency payments that totaled less than his pension would have been. He did not look at anyone in the courtroom. He had already become the thing he feared most: irrelevant. Victor Hale, the fixer. The man who had written "Subject has been neutralized" about Natalie Chen and filed it away like a quarterly report. Disbarred. License revoked by the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers following a separate disciplinary proceeding. Convicted of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering related to the Natalie Chen case and the intimidation of Marcus Webb. Sentence: 5 years federal prison plus 3 years supervised release. When the judge read the sentence, Hale's face did not change. He had already emptied. His wife had filed for divorce 2 months earlier. His firm had dissolved. His partners had scattered to other practices, each one distancing themselves from the wreckage with the practiced urgency of people who had always known the foundation was rotten, but preferred the view from the upper floors. Victor Hale had spent his career making problems disappear, and now he was the problem that no one would touch. Vanessa was brought in last. She wore a gray prison uniform, her hair was pulled back. No makeup, no pearl earrings, no cream blouse. She looked 10 years older than the woman who had stepped out of the Cadillac in her sister's wedding dress one October afternoon, and smiled like the world was a room she had just redecorated to her liking. She had pleaded guilty to conspiracy and financial fraud as part of her cooperation agreement. The judge acknowledged her cooperation but noted, with a precision that I felt in my sternum, the specific nature of her role. He read from her own email. The defendant identified her own biological sister as a target for exploitation, using language that demonstrates premeditation, calculation, and a deliberate weaponization of familial trust. Sentence: 12 years, reduced to 8, with the possibility of parole after 6 based on continued cooperation. Vanessa nodded when the number was spoken. She did not cry. She did not look at the gallery. She did not search for me or for our parents. She stood when the bailiff approached, and she walked toward the side exit with her eyes fixed on the door ahead of her, and the door opened and she passed through it, and it closed behind her with the same mechanical click I had heard in the courthouse hallway 6 months ago when Rachel led her away. It was the quietest exit in the entire story, and the most final. Marcus Webb's sentencing had happened 2 months earlier in a separate proceeding. His full involuntary cooperation, combined with documented evidence of coercion through his gambling debt and direct threats from Daniel's operatives, resulted in a reduced charge. 2 years probation and community service. No prison time. He sent me a handwritten letter after his hearing, 3 pages in small, careful handwriting that leaned slightly to the left. He apologized for framing me, for being too weak to refuse, for taking months to find the courage that should have come in the first minute. He wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I need you to know that what you did, standing up when no one else would, when I certainly wouldn't, made me understand that silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice, and I chose wrong for a very long time." I read the letter once, folded it, and placed it in my desk drawer. I did not reply, but I did not throw it away. Natalie Chen's story finally received the correction it had been owed for 4 years. With the federal case complete and the evidence of Daniel's operation fully documented, Natalie's original termination from Harman Dynamics in Virginia was formally reviewed by the company's board of directors in coordination with the Department of Defense. The data breach accusation against her was overturned. Her security clearance was restored. She received a financial settlement whose amount was confidential, but Frank told me over coffee one afternoon that it was enough to make up for 4 years of dental software. Natalie accepted a position as a senior cybersecurity consultant at a private firm in Washington, D.C. She and I talked on the phone every other Wednesday evening. Not about the case, not about Daniel or Victor Hale or the emails that had reduced her to a subject line. We talked about books, about cooking disasters, about terrible television shows that we watched anyway because sometimes your brain needs to chew on something soft after years of swallowing stones. She was the only person who understood certain things about my experience without explanation, and I was the only person who understood hers. That kind of understanding doesn't need words. It just needs someone on the other end of the line who knows what the silence means. Rachel Dominguez told me who sent the anonymous messages over coffee at a diner in the Seaport District, 3 weeks after the sentencing. I'd been carrying the question for months, turning it over in quiet moments the way you turn over a stone in your pocket, feeling its edges, never quite ready to set it down. "Elena Vargas," Rachel said. "Daniel's former executive assistant at Moretti Holdings. She worked for him for 7 years. Elena had seen everything from the inside. The operations, the women, the money flows, the way Daniel selected targets and cultivated insiders and discarded both when they were no longer useful. She stayed silent for years because she was afraid, because she depended on the salary to pay for her mother's home care, because she understood better than anyone what happened to people who crossed Daniel Moretti. But when I was targeted, when Elena saw the familiar pattern activate for what she knew was at least the 3rd time, something broke inside her that was stronger than fear. She bought a burner phone. She taught herself VPN routing using YouTube tutorials and a second-hand laptop. She sent the messages at night from a parking lot behind her apartment building, timing each one to the events she could see unfolding through Daniel's communications. The first message, the one that warned me on the day I was suspended. The second, directing me to the Moretti Foundation donor list. The third, telling me Marcus was alive and Daniel was planning to flee. Each one a small act of defiance by a woman who had been too afraid to speak for 7 years and finally decided that silence cost more than speaking. Elena was never charged. She cooperated with the FBI as a confidential informant once her identity was confirmed, providing testimony that corroborated the hard drive evidence and filled gaps that the other witnesses could not. I asked Rachel for her phone number. Rachel hesitated. Then she gave it. I called Elena that evening from my kitchen. The conversation was short. Elena's voice was quiet, steady, thick with something that sounded like exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "Years sooner. Before Natalie. Before you. I watched it happen and I told myself it wasn't my responsibility." "You said something when it mattered," I told her. "You sent me the first message the day they suspended me. I was sitting in my car in a parking garage thinking I had nothing left, and your 6 words gave me a reason to keep going." Elena cried. "I didn't. But I felt something shift. A small gear turning inside a mechanism I didn't fully understand. The quiet recalibration of a world that was trying, imperfectly and belatedly, to right itself." 3 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived at my new address. Handwritten. 4 pages. My mother's handwriting, the same looping cursive she'd used on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the notes she tucked into my lunchbox when I was 7. Diane Bennett wrote about the day I was born. How my father held me in the delivery room and said, "This one's going to be tough. Look at those fists." She wrote about watching me grow up quiet and self-sufficient while Vanessa demanded everything in the house and most things outside of it. She wrote, "I told myself you didn't need me the way Vanessa did. That you were fine. That you were strong enough to handle anything. I used your strength as permission to ignore you. And when Daniel came, I used his money as permission to keep ignoring you. I don't know if you can forgive that. I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness for it. But I need you to know that I see you now. For the first time in your life, I see you. Not as the reliable one, not as the one who adjusts, just Kayla. And I'm sorry." My father included a separate note, shorter, rougher, written on a sheet of yellow legal paper in the blocky print he used for everything because he'd never trusted his own cursive. He did not apologize directly. He wrote, "I was wrong about Daniel. I was wrong about Vanessa. I was wrong about you. Your mother says I should tell you I'm proud of you, and she's right. I am. I just don't know how to say it without it sounding like too little too late." The last line. "It probably is too late, but I'm saying it anyway." I read both letters at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I sat with the words. I did not call my parents. I folded the letters carefully and placed them in the top drawer of my desk, the same drawer where Marcus's letter sat. I was not ready to forgive. I might never be, but I did not throw the letters away. Some doors you don't open yet. But you don't nail them shut either. You leave them closed and you let time decide whether the hinges still work. Late October, 1 year almost to the day since the Cadillac blocked my gate. I stood in front of a house, not the apartment Daniel had leased for me, not Megan's guest room, not the Colonial in Newton where I learned to be invisible. A 3-bedroom Craftsman in Jamaica Plain with a front porch and hardwood floors, and a maple tree in the backyard that was turning the color of fire. I bought it with my own money, my name on the mortgage, my credit, my savings plus the settlement Meridian Defense had paid me after a very swift and very quiet negotiation in which the company's lawyers decided it was cheaper to make me whole than to let the public learn that their head of cybersecurity had been a foreign intelligence asset for a decade. Meridian reinstated me 4 months ago, not just reinstated, promoted, Director of Cybersecurity Operations. The position Howard Langford held before he was let out of the building in handcuffs. The board offered it to me personally, and the irony was not lost on anyone in the room. I had his nameplate removed and did not replace it with my own. The door just said, Director, Cybersecurity. No name. I didn't need one. The people who mattered knew who was inside. Moving day was a Saturday. Megan came with boxes and a Bluetooth speaker playing music too loud for the quiet neighborhood. Frank DeLuca showed up uninvited with a toolbox and spent 3 hours installing new locks on every door and window. "Old habit," he said when I thanked him, but I saw the way he tested each lock twice before moving to the next one, and I understood that protection was the language he spoke when he didn't have words. Natalie sent flowers from DC white peonies with a card that read, "First house you chose yourself. Make it loud." By evening, the boxes were mostly unpacked. Megan ordered Thai food and we ate on the living room floor because the dining table wouldn't arrive until Thursday. She looked around the room, Empty walls, stacked boxes, paint smell still sharp in the air, and said, "It doesn't look like much yet." I smiled. "It looks like mine. That's enough." After Megan left, I walked through the house alone. Each room was empty in the way new things are empty, not lacking, but waiting. I opened the back door and stepped onto the small porch. The maple tree stood at the center of the yard, its leaves burning red and gold against the dark October sky. The same October air that had carried the sound of a Cadillac engine idling in my driveway 1 year ago now carried the smell of wet leaves in someone's fireplace and the distant sound of a dog barking down the block. I sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee and no phone, and no laptop, and no evidence folders, and no fear. Just me and the sound of the city settling into night. 1 year ago, a black Cadillac blocked my gate and my sister stepped out wearing my wedding dress. She stood on my doorstep with the man I thought loved me and told me I'd always lived for her. She was right, I had. For 32 years, I bent myself into whatever shape my family needed. I gave up scholarships so Vanessa could have hers. I signed loans so she could chase dreams she abandoned before the ink dried. I sat at the kids' table until I was 26 because someone had to make room, and it was always me. I told myself it was love. I told myself that's what family means. It wasn't love. It was a habit. And habits are just choices you stopped questioning. Daniel saw that habit and used it. Vanessa saw it and sold it. My parents saw it and looked the other way because looking cost more than not looking, and I had always been the one who absorbed the cost. And for a while, a long and dark while, I believed them. I believed I wasn't enough. That I needed someone else to choose me before I could matter. That my value was determined by how much of myself I was willing to give away. I was wrong. I didn't need Daniel's ring. I didn't need my parents' approval. I didn't need Vanessa to see me as an equal. I needed to stop waiting for permission to exist. The woman who stood in that driveway 1 year ago, the one who watched the Cadillac drive away and set a diamond ring on the concrete steps, she was already stronger than all of them combined. She just didn't know it yet. I know it now. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in my story, if you've spent years shrinking so someone else could expand, if you've sacrificed until you forgot what it felt like to choose yourself, if you've loved people who treated your loyalty like a resource to be mined, and your silence like consent, I need you to hear something. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too far gone. You just haven't started yet. And starting doesn't require anyone's permission. It never did. My name is Kayla Bennett. I'm 33 years old. I live in a house I bought with my own money, in a city that tried to bury me, surrounded by people who chose me without conditions. And for the first time in my life, the woman in the mirror is someone I recognize. That's my story, every word of it. And if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own sister, your own family, your own Cadillac moment, the thing that broke you open and forced you to rebuild, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are in your story. Tell me if you've started yet, or if today might be the day you do. Because I spent 32 years thinking I was the only woman living like this, giving everything to people who never gave anything back, and it turns out I wasn't even close to alone. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. I tell stories like this every week, real stories from real lives about the moments that crack us open and the choices that put us back together. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a friend, a daughter, a mother, a woman who's still bending herself into someone else's shape and calling it love, send it to her. Sometimes the thing that saves us isn't advice or therapy or a plan. Sometimes it's just knowing that someone else walked through the same fire and came out the other side still breathing. I'll see you in the next one. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.